Welcome to Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup. I'm your host, Jason Bland, and tonight we have one of my favorite returning guests, and the only reason why I am doing a show tonight is because of this guest, is Paul Anthony Wallis. You know him from Escaping from Eden. He's the author of Scars of Eden, and his newest book just released today, and I've had an honor of having an early copy to read it, is Echoes of Eden. And this book is amazing. For anybody into the subject of paleocontact or ancient aliens, this is one of my best guests on this topic. I mean, by far, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Not a criticism of any other guest on this that's been on about this topic, but Paul really gets into the crux of the matter, the meaning behind the words, the biblical texts, other cultures as well. You know, this new book really takes a look at the human potential. You know, what has been suppressed, why these things in religion and narratives have been suppressed over the centuries and thousands of years to suppress us. I love this book. I can't wait to talk about it. Like I said, I would not be here if Paul wasn't that guest. Because, this last week, my whole family came down with COVID. Yeah, same with me. So I sound like crap tonight. But that's all right. I will drudge through because we have an amazing guest. No Jamie for sure tonight. She wasn't able to make it. Rob, I don't know. I hope Rob will be here because otherwise I'm running the World Wide Web weird, and you know how that goes. Got a lot to get to, so let's go ahead and get rolling on into it. Welcome to another night of Paranormal Soup. As I said before, I'm your host, Jason Bland. Tonight's guest, Paul Anthony Wallis, will join us after the World Wide Web of Weird. Speaking of, I don't have Rob. I don't know where Rob is. I haven't checked my messages in the last few minutes. I haven't saw he was online. Hopefully Rob will be here. I don't know. Don't have a message, I don't think. I know Jamie wasn't going to be able to make it tonight. Hopefully we have Rob. Oh, nope. Speaking of the devil, he heard me. The devil himself. Rob Autry. How you doing tonight, Rob?
The devil himself is here.
Hey, you came on my show with COVID. I figured I had to do a show even if I had COVID, right? Actually, it was pretty So the first night was like the whole body aches and chills, but no fever. And otherwise, I was like, yeah, this is pretty nothing. And then last night, I felt the sinus crap start. And I just have like a sinus infection. So I hate sinus infections and talking on a show. I'm going to sound horrible by weird. Not that I don't when I'm normal. Are you able to get the link, get that ready?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, we got a lot to get to in that. I wanted to shout out to Mandy. Somebody did. I've gotten some emails, some really interesting emails. Paranormal Soup, jbland@gmail.com. She sent me a really interesting story. I won't tell it, but about her experiences and wanted to talk. And I said I'd talk to her this weekend. I've just, the main symptom of this now, besides the science fiction, is just lack of energy. Just total lack of energy. Like, I don't want to do anything. I've been napping all the time. I've just been napping. I make myself get up, do stuff around the house, just to make sure I'm moving. I feel better when I do, but then I'm like, oh yeah, nap. A nap sounds amazing right now. Yeah. And then I do that. Like reading Paul's book, I almost have it finished. I'm almost finished with Paul's book, but I was trying to finish it before the show. Every time I start reading it, it's nothing against any book. I could read any book right now. I'd be like, that's the main symptom, is that, and now a sinus infection. But otherwise, I'm doing good. Family's doing good. Don't worry about us. The Bland household is holding through on COVID. My wife goes back to work tomorrow. Kids go back to school, and I'm got to get a positive or negative test, not positive, a negative test, so I can go back to work soon. Like I said, got a lot to get to, so let's go ahead and roll into the World Wide Web of Weird. Tonight on the World Wide Web of Weird, I thought I'd bring up this article because last week we talked about famed filmmaker David Rolfe, who challenged the British Museum to recreate the iconic shroud to prove that it's a forgery. We had that article last week. Well, now we got this new one from Unexplained Mysteries. New test dates show the Shroud of Turin came from the time of Jesus. So I think David there has a little insight why he's now telling the British Museum to put their money where their mouth is. For those listening on the Paranormal Soup radio app, we are a webcast. We do stream out live to YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and I'll narrate as best as possible if you want to listen with my COVID nasally sounds here tonight. All right, so yes, this first one. New test dates Turin Shroud to the time of Jesus. I got the shorter article by Unexplained Mysteries here. Believed by many to be the actual burial cloth. See, this is going to be bad. I can't breathe. I can mispronounce everything, right? Believed by many to be the actual burial cloth of Jesus himself, the Shroud of Turin, which is today situated at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, has long been the subject of intense scrutiny, controversy, and debate. One of the biggest points of contention regarding its authenticity is its age. If it was genuine, it would be expected to date back to 2,000 years, the time of Jesus. However, a private study conducted in 1988 using radiocarbon dating seemed to suggest it was, in fact, only 700 years old, leading to the suggestion it was most likely medieval forgery. Now, however, a new test using a technique known as wide-angle X-ray scattering has contradicted the 1988 findings by indicating the shroud really is 2,000 years old. According to the Italian scientist Liberato Di Caro, radiocarbon dating is not a reliable technique for dating fabric, and the newer X-ray scattering method provides a more reliable result. Fabric samples are usually subject to all kinds of contamination, which cannot always be controlled and completely removed from the dated specimen, he told NCR. If cleaning the procedure of the sample is not thoroughly performed, carbon-14 dating is not reliable. In addition to dating the shroud of the time to Jesus, the scientists also discovered traces of pollen on the fabric that can be found only in the Middle East. If confirmed, it would add further evidence that the shroud was, in fact, a genuine article. We've had guests on, more than several, speak on the Shroud of Turin in that test from 1988, and they also point out that the fabric had been repaired in the medieval times with cloth and that to try to keep it together, and that they were purposely taking a sample they knew it's going to date that period of time. I don't know, but it's coming out more and more that it might be from that time. All right. Like I said, we've had several guests have contended that on there. Okay, next up. Now, my son had taken this survey. I think I know his answer would be contradictory to what most people answered on this survey. All right. Survey finds vast majority of Americans oppose reviving dinosaurs. I know one 10-year-old that would disagree. Now, lightning new survey concerning the prospect of reviving extinct creatures found that a vast majority of Americans would rather keep the dinosaurs relegated to the past. The thought-provoking poll produced by YouGov asked 1,000 people for their thoughts on what seems to be an increasingly possible scenario wherein scientists will be able to bring lost species back to life. While the idea may be popular in fictional fare, a surprising 45% of people surveyed said that they are against reviving extinct species, while only 33% were particularly enthusiastic about the concept. Even more insightful, however, may be which the creatures made the proverbial cut. Among the array of animals that are no longer with us, the giant tortoise surprisingly came out on top, with 50% of the people pro-revival. Yeah, nobody has a problem with reviving a big tortoise. I think we're good with that, right? It's the T-Rex. We all know it. Let's see where the shelled wonder was. Yeah, the shelled wonder was followed by. Yeah, let's not do the pterodactyls for sure.
Yeah, you can just fly by and pick you up.
The shelled wonder was followed by passenger pigeons and white rhinoceros. I cannot talk. With each gathering 44%. The famed dodo bird, which was recently in the headlines with regards to very revival scenarios explored in the survey, came in 30. Nobody wants the dodo bird back. Nobody wants the dodo bird back. You know why? Because they play Ark Survival. My son plays that game, and all that damn bird in that game just is so annoying. The noises it makes.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's what it sounds like. That's why it went extinct. The famed dodo bird, which was recently in the headlines regards, blah, 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 39. Okay, the dodo bird got 39%. The Caribbean monk seal was close behind at 38%. Sadly, those wondering how the more exotic extinct animals fared forced to look a little further down the list. The Tasmanian tiger, a favorite animal, only got 30%. The woolly mammoth, I'm surprised, only got 27%.
Wow.
Like, that's a big one. My son was like, when are they going to do it? When are they going to do it? Like, he's a little mad scientist like his daddy. Let's see what else I got here. Of course, most all the dinosaurs ranked in the 20%, rounding out were dinosaurs like the Triceratops, pterodactyl, T-Rex, receiving a mere 12 to 10%. Yeah, we seen Jurassic Park. That's why.
Yeah, we know how that ends.
Yeah, my son would be like, "Do it, just do it." That's how my son would be. I mean, yeah, he'd be all for it. But you know. It's probably a bad idea. I think the surveys are. I think people have the right, thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's probably. I know how the movie ended.
There's so many sequels, and they all don't end well, but they keep doing it.
They keep doing it. Yeah, they're gonna do some. They're gonna do something.
It's just like nuclear weapons. I mean, once the cat's out of the bag and people start making stuff, and that's the whole point of Jurassic Park and the following sequels, is that once that technology's out there, once it's used, that genie is out of the bottle. You cannot put it back in.
Yeah, won't fit.
And they can take the survey and people can be against it, but there's always the mad scientist with my 10-year-old's brain. It's like, just do it. That's gonna do it. You're gonna do it. And I
got a T-Rex in my backyard.
He
got away.
Not if we should or can we? It's let's see if we can. Let's try.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up, I got this one. Explain mysteries. This is a bigger article from Live Science. Is a controversial new book claims that Hobbit-like Homo floresiensis, I guess that's what the name is, may not have actually gone extinct. Evidence of the mysterious habit of the Flores in the islands of Indonesia was first unearthed in a cave back in 2003, a discovery that would go on to become the topic of much controversy and debate. The name Homo floresiensis, if I'm saying that right, these pint-sized hominids are now believed to be a previously undiscovered species of human which died out somewhere around 60,000 years ago. However, not everyone is convinced. According to retired anthropologist Gregory Forth, of the University of Alberta, these real-life hobbits may not have gone extinct at all and could still be living on the island of Flores today. In particular, he cites reports of 8 men sightings from people on the island as potential evidence that these long-lost human ancestors may be still surviving there. Like Bigfoot, maybe, I mean, they're having, you have skunk ape, which is a shorter version of Bigfoot in Florida. There are a lot of these kind of creatures that could have been surviving secretly. We simply don't know what these species became extinct, or indeed, I dare say, we don't even know if they did go extinct, he told Live Science. So there's some possibility that they're still alive. Not everyone in the scientific community agrees with that theory, however. Some, like paleoanthropologist John Hawkes, have emphasized the fact that the island has a population of some 2 million people. I get that, yeah, it'd be hard for them to hide, right, on an island. The idea that an entire community of prehistoric hominids could continue to survive there undiscovered therefore seems far-fetched, to say the least. Realistically, the idea that there's a large primate that is unobserved on the island and surviving the population can sustain itself is pretty close to zero, he said. I can't default him on that idea. But who knows? I mean, one of the big theories to how Bigfoot gets around or hides, and that is the cave systems. Maybe they have some kind of cave systems on the island.
Could be.
Somewhere where these things can hide,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many stories of creatures coming out of caves and that, maybe that's where these things learn to get the hell away from us dangerous humans.
Yeah, it's something.
They have a reputation.
In a cave, though.
Yeah, but put yourself outside perspective of not being a human and see how humans treat everything. You'd go live in a cave too.
That's very true.
I'm not going to stick around out here. That cave looks really nice. Those humans are crazy. Yeah. Crazy. I'll go live in the cave. That sounds good.
Away from these knuckleheads.
Yeah. They're breeding like rabbits out there, humans. All right.
Stupid as the stupid does.
Yeah. Yeah. I keep telling people to watch the movie Idiocracy. I mean.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. About breeding and its stupidity. Okay, let's move on. All right. Where we're at. We're at number 4. All right. So this one I can't read the whole article, and you should, they have a shorter version of it, and it's still very long. It unexplained mysteries, but the original article was from, what was it from? The Conversation. But it's something I've talked about on the show, something I've thought about since, I don't know, I was 10 years old or even younger, about time travel. I'm a huge fan of the idea of time travel, and my idea of time travel, and I thought of this before John Teeter, but the reason I fell in love with the whole John Teeter, probably hoax, was the idea that the only way time travel would be possible is through parallel universes. That you're not really time traveling. I've been fascinated with this idea, I said, since grade school, okay? The only way you could time travel is not you could actually time travel to your own past. Like, you cannot go back there and do the Marty McFly and almost separate your parents and disappear, that would not be possible. There's too many, the paradox problem, right? And it's stuff, and when I was really young, I discovered the idea of parallel universes, thanks to my dad into quantum physics and all that. Thank you, Dad. And I came fascinated. That is the only way time travel would be real, is you could travel back, you could step on all the butterflies you want, because it's not actually your past. There's multiple timelines and different points in time you can travel to any of them. And you could see your past, but it's not your past. It might be a little slightly different than your past.
A version of your past.
Yeah, and then that's why I felt, when the whole John Teeter thing came out, that's why I got fascinated with it. Not just because he was somebody on a time board or on a chat board saying he was a time traveler. He was saying the time travel theory I always believed in, that it was parallel universes. He wasn't actually in his own actual past. It wouldn't be. I mean, in any sense, even if you have the butterfly effect, if you traveled back in time, I know I'm going to make your head hurt. You travel back in time, you touch a butterfly, now the future you came from no longer exists. You're an interloper, either way. But with parallel universes, it doesn't matter. Step on all the butterflies you want. Terra Nova, another great show. They had one season, they canceled. They go 62 million years back into the past when there were supposed to be dinosaurs in that, but they know they can step on all the butterflies they want because they figured out it's a parallel timeline. It's not actually their past. And of course, they've destroyed humanity and they got to travel back there. I know. I should make a Paranormal Soup sci-fi fantasy fiction list. Yep. TVs, movies, and books. I mentioned so many on here. All right, let's move on. Before we run out of time or I run out of breath. Because, man, it's hard to talk when you can't breathe through your nose.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, God. I'll make some coffee here. I need coffee. My wife's like, you haven't had the dry mouth thing? Because that's what got my wife. She's like, oh, she was drinking so much water.
Yeah, so was I.
I wasn't having that problem until now. I'm on a show talking.
Yeah.
That shows you how much my wife talks. Okay. Where were we at? Okay. All right, this next one, I love Urban Explorers. This one is UBX Hill, or Urbex Hill. And, of course, covered from we've got 2 videos tonight from my favorite YouTube channel, is Hidden Underbelly 2.0. For all weird, unusual videos that pop up online and strange stuff, Hidden Underbelly 2.0 really does a great job of getting them out there and talking about them and analyzing them. Huge fan. And this one he got from Urbex Hill, who claims as an urban explorer, and he won't name the location, which is good. You don't want to do that. People go there. Captured something of a creature in some tunnels. Nightmare piece of footage circulating on, this was coast to coast, reportedly shows glowing eyes of two mysterious creatures that emerge from the darkness to watch possibly unwanted visitor. The unsettling video, highlights of which you can be seen, posted on YouTube last week by urban explorer Urbex Hill, who documents his visits to abandoned locations throughout Ohio. In this particular instance, the young man ventured into an undisclosed tunnel system hidden deep within the forest, and according to him, traversed more than 10 miles within the labyrinth subterranean world when he experienced a truly haunting encounter. And in this video, an urban explorer walks through a long tunnel with water flowing through it, and it suddenly sees a pair of glowing eyes peer out. I'm telling this for the radio audience who can't see it. Go ahead and play it. You'll see it, and then I'll tell you my thoughts. At first, I'm saying, oh, CG, but I did really look at this, and me and my sons were watching this over and over again because they love anything cryptid like this. And my oldest son was like, "Oh, give me this guy's Urbex Hill channel. I want to see this." He goes and looks at places people don't go. I'm going, yeah, check it out. So now I'm like, I don't think they're all going to have creatures in it like this. I don't know. I want to check out this guy's channel now. This could be just clickbait. See if we can make it bigger. There we go. You're going to see two sets of eyes come out. People will fake stuff. I don't know if this guy is. It seems like he's got a channel where he's done a lot of urban exploring, nothing paranormal. But I got to check that out further. I haven't had time. So now he goes and explores further down the hallway. I think we missed it, but I do a zoom in of it. Hidden Underbelly does a great analysis of this video. When you see it again, you'll notice there's one set of eyes that peeks out, and another set that kind of comes out. And this is my zoom in of it. There's the first set. But you'll actually see the water splash at the bottom as it runs away. I put some filters on it where you could actually make out a form slightly. Like you can see the arm and legs. I put some different color filters to try to bring it out. See, when it runs away, you'll see like kind of a splash at the bottom. See it? And it's like leg maybe or something there.
Yeah.
It's hard to see in the original video. But if you put a filter on it and zoom in, you can see there's an actual form there. At first, I'm like, oh, this is some CG stuff with some eyes. But I can actually use the filter and see there is a form of a body there of some kind. Now, what would be living down there? And I'm guessing he won't give the location, but he does this in Ohio. So this is some kind of forest in Ohio that has some big irrigation tunnel. So, this is big water running through here. 10 miles long labyrinth, he says. I mean, people could probably figure out where it is, and I'm not telling you to do that. Don't go there if you do. Figure it out. Don't. Leave it to the semi-amateurs. I don't know. I mean, the guy, he's done it enough. He can call himself a professional amateur doing it. I don't know. But I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't go down there. If this is real and he decided to keep looking, kudos to him.
Yeah, no kidding.
Goes further down the tunnel. I would have gone further. I would have gone back the other way. I'd be like, cool, got a video of that. I'm going to leave now.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm out of here. Yeah, there's eyes. I'm out of here. And they're up high enough to where, it's not like a raccoon or something.
When I said about, again, we're talking about the hobbits and Bigfoot and them living in caves, and why not use a natural or artificial tunnel system to live out and hide too? And that's their natural habit. And anything, Bigfoot's been described as having glowing eyes. If something is down in the deep dark, you think they kind of might have glowing eyes, something to see, some kind of weird form of night vision we don't understand. I don't know. Or just a light shine from his off of their eyes, but they probably have really good night vision if they're down there.
Definitely.
All right, let's move on.
The better to eat you with.
Mm-hmm. All right, this next one's been making rounds again. Hidden Underbelly 2.0. You can find this. Puzzling piece of home security footage from Arizona features an eerie anomaly seemingly crossing the road before vanishing into thin air. Some suspect the oddity could be a full-body apparition. The spooky video was reportedly captured last November in the city of Tucson, but only came to light this past week when the homeowner shared it online in the hopes of figuring out what appeared outside their house that night. We've seen a number of videos similar to this. Some videos, when it comes to infrared night vision, a person can look a little bit translucent or ghostly when they're just out of frame. But this is a little different. This is a lot different, actually. Go ahead and play it. Like I said, Hidden Underbelly 2.0 is a YouTube channel, and he does a big analysis of this, and way better than me, but we just casually comment on these curious videos. Now I'll have a zoom in of it here. You see it like goes into the ground. And usually when you see these kind of like translucent figures, it's really a person in the background, an IR. They're not coming towards the camera. They get more defined as they come to the camera, not more or less defined and disappear. Now, could it be a video artifact? Something, a mess up in the recording system? Possibly. But I'd see unlikely. This is very, I think, strange. Definitely noteworthy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely translucent. Like I said, it doesn't get any less translucent as it comes closer to the camera, as it comes walking across it. And then it kind of goes downwards into the ground.
This looks like a lady in a long white dress.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes down, down, down.
I mean, if it's just some random video fragment or some problem with the camera system, that'd be really weird. I think that's, I don't think so. All right, let's see. We better get to the last one before we run out of time. All right. I saw a lot of, like, this article gives it the story. Unexplained Mysteries, love it. Great website. You do short articles on longer articles usually. That's why I go with them. And they give this this story its proper form. Nick Pope, ETs could disguise drones as birds for insects. Okay, that's what he says. You know, he's hypothetically talking about what's possible. I saw so many different websites cover this as crazy UFO researcher says aliens are watching us with birds and insects. Like, basically is how they tried to twist the headline. Like, Nick Pope's been around a long time. He's not crazy. He worked for the government, just the way I saw this was twisted really kind of ticked me off. One of the most prominent figures in the field of UFO research, Nick Pope, famously worked for the British Ministry of Defense from 1991 to 1994. We know that. Speaking recently to the Mirror, Pope put forward the suggestion that an advanced ancestral race if they wanted to monitor our activities here on Earth without raising suspicion, all it would need to do is disguise its minor devices as common types of animals that nobody would look twice at. If aliens want to hack into and control a living organism or construct a drone that's a perfect mimic, it would be the best choice to something ordinary and ubiquitous, like a seagull or a housefly. What's the thing is our governments have done that. I mean, we've looked at making bugs, artificial bugs that are actually little remote listeners, that can fly around and look like an insect. He's only talking about what we're trying to do. Yeah. So it's not crazy.
Always said
are here.
Yeah, the best place to hide something is in plain view.
That's why I think they're just, they don't need that. They got the moon. They're looking right down at us.
Yep.
But just bother me the way that they kind of like twisted that, like Nick Pope crazy. I'm like, no, Nick Pope's not crazy. He's been researching this stuff for years. It's just a hypothetical. Our guest, I didn't even realize Paul is in there. Hey, Paul. We're going to go to commercial break. Paul Wallis is going to join us to talk about his book, Echoes of Eden. It just released today, right?
Yes, today is day one. It's book launch day, just for a little longer, for Echoes of Eden.
I'm almost finished with the book. Had COVID all week, so I've been trying my best. I love it, though. I love it. Yeah. I cannot wait.
Oh, great. That's great to hear. You're a brave soul doing the show tonight. I really
If it had been any other guest, I might have canceled. But it was you, so I'm here, COVID and all.
All right. Thank you.
All right, guys, we're going to go to commercial break. We'll be right back with our guest, Paul Anthony Wallis, author of Escaping from Eden, Scars of Eden, and releasing today, Echoes of Eden. But we got to go to commercial break. When we're back, also, I know some of you guys want to call in tonight. Don't worry. We will open up the phone lines later in the show. Give us about an hour, all right? And we'll open the phone lines. You call in, ask your questions of Paul. Share your experiences, too, because we're going to talk about, he's had some people's personal experiences in this book, too, including his own. Have you had contact or feel you might have contact with ETs? I believe they're contacting people all the time. It's never stopped. Thousands of years of ET contact happening, and people just don't want to talk about it. I have my own personal experiences. I, even doing this show, have trouble talking about. So if you want a place to talk about it with no judgments or open forum, phone lines will be open later in the show. But we got to go to break. We'll be right back.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do voices from beyond the cold case files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Of the second kind, physical evidence of a UFO. Close encounters of the third kind, contact. From Steven Spielberg, the director of Jaws, comes one of the most ambitious and unusual films ever made. And what you will see has never been seen before. It's a cosmic mystery crossing what many scientists believe will be the next threshold of human experience. It is called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It begins in an Indiana town and leads to one inescapable conclusion. We are not alone. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Certificate A. Now showing at the Odeon, Leicester Square.
The international chart-topping, Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest has been described as terrifyingly real, a must-read, shocking and chilling brilliance, genuinely worrying, utterly frightening. Don't read before bed. Described as one of the spookiest writers out there, bestselling author G.L. Davies presents Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest, the true paranormal account that is shocking the world. Dare you enter? Dare you read? Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, and wherever books are sold. Pray you never have to live there.
This is the sound of a space clock aboard a U.S. satellite 180 miles above the Earth. No one winds up this timepiece. It's powered by a tiny battery, a battery that delivers power for years without replacement. Now the same type of battery, the Duracell battery, can bring new reliability and long life to your battery-operated equipment. Radios, cameras, toys, all run far longer. Duracell batteries, the long-distance power cells, outlast any ordinary battery. The same type of battery that keeps space clocks running for years can bring long life to anything powered by batteries. Dura, as in durable. Cell, as in power cell. The Duracell battery, made by Mallory.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from Talkstream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Switch to DCS ranging.
240, nominal to profile.
We're in the pipe. 5 by 5.
Tonight on Paranormal Soup, our guest is Paul Anthony Wallis. Paul Wallis is an internationally best-selling author whose books probe world mythologies, ancestral narratives for their insights into human origins, human potential, and our place in the cosmos. As a senior churchman, Paul served as a church doctor and a theological educator at an Archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Australia, and has published numerous titles on Christian mysticism and spirituality. He's a popular speaker at summits and conferences around the world. His 2020 book, Escaping from Eden, was hailed by George Noory as this generation's Chariots of the Gods, propelling Paul into the international stage as a go-to guy in the field of paleocontact. The international best-selling 2021 sequel, The Scars of Eden, is endorsed by Erich Von Daniken. His new book, Echoes of Eden, which released today, is endorsed by George Noory, is due for release. Of course, it says May 2022. I had this early. It's now. It's out today. You can get it today on Amazon, Kindle edition. You can order it. I got luckily, thank you, Paul, I got an early copy of this. Thought, oh yeah, I have all week to read it, and then I got COVID. and literally want to sleep like all day long. That's been the main symptom. Just want to sleep. But this book it did keep me up. Kept me up late last night reading it. I'm almost finished. I think I have like 30 pages left in this book. Maybe it's good I don't get the ending. I don't want to give it all away because you need to go out there and get this book. You should get all three of his books if you haven't. If you're any interest in the idea of ancient alien contact with humanity and how it is, influenced us, made us who we are, and maybe help, and then the censorship of who we are and our potential. This is the book series you need to read. We got a lot to get to. We'll open up the phone lines later in the show. Let's go ahead and get to our guest. Paul, of course, it is an honor to have you back on. Like I said, if I had any other guests scheduled tonight, nothing gets any other guests I would ever have, I might have canceled. But it had to be you. And I was like, I'm not canceling this show. I've been looking forward too much to the show. I knew your book was releasing today when I was I'm almost done with it. And I'm like, I'm so into this subject. I want to do the show, sick or not. I was doing pretty good, actually, until last night, and I got the sinus infection part of it. So I'm gonna sound like crap. So we'll listen to your wonderful voice way more than mine tonight, right?
Well, Jason, I really appreciate you having me on while you're sick. And if this is the low energy Jason, oh my goodness, stand back, everybody.
No, this is Jason with Mucinex sinus and lots of coffee. It's going to be regretting it tomorrow morning when I get up at 6 a.m. to get my kids ready for school.
That coffee will get us through. And I'm really pleased to be with you today because it's day one of my book launch of Echoes of Eden, and I couldn't be more pleased to be with you. I absolutely love your show, Jason. I love the scope of it. I love the things you look at, and you have such a great energy that you bring to this. You're so well researched, and I just love your enthusiasm. You give me energy when we have our conversations.
Well, your book gave me energy. I was like, I kind of also wanted to read it. Like, I was hoping to finish. I like to sometimes time myself. I usually can time myself and read a book and finish it right up to the end of the show, so it's all fresh in my mind. And that's why I'll hold back from reading it too early, because you gave me an early copy of this months ago, and I didn't want to read it ahead of time and then lose it. I could have. I would have totally been still into it. But one of the things that I've always why I enjoyed having you on this show, and from the very first time I've had you on the show, as somebody. Spiritually, I've struggled because I believe in Jesus Christ. I do. But I don't tell people I'm a Christian. I'm not a Christian. I don't consider myself a Christian because the main idea of what Christianity is nowadays, or the orthodoxy of Christianity, is completely against my view. I don't believe the Old Testament God, Yahweh, was the same thing that Jesus was talking about. And to find somebody like you, and there are others, and we'll talk about them tonight, to come across who has the expertise, the literal knowledge to interpret these words, come to that kind of mostly the same conclusion as me. From a long time, I've had this conclusion when I got really into Jesus Christ. I finally, there was a big part of me a long time that did not want to even look at anything Jesus Christ-wise. Because my childhood, I saw what Christianity was. I knew the history of Christianity, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to know any part of that. That's just how I was. And I might offend my Christian friends out there, but that's how I was. It was my mid-20s I got into Jesus and really got in. I mean, I'd read the Bible, I always saw the stark difference between the New Testament and the Old Testament God. Of course. From a young age, I could see it. I don't know how anybody else couldn't see it, is what my thought was. Not that I'm anything special, and I know a lot of people did, but as a young kid, I was just looking at it as like, what? Do you not notice the difference here? you know,
exactly.
Between Jesus, like very peaceful, sit with your neighbor, like sit with the prostitutes, and very peaceful seems like kind of guy, to the Yahweh God, it's gonna take out whole civilizations.
Exactly. And for many people, that is the start point of a journey. If they're willing to name the elephant in the room and say, hey, there's an incompatibility here, and then follow the logic, they will conclude fairly quickly that many of the stories recorded in the Hebrew scriptures are stories about something else. And in my Eden series, I go to, well, what are they about?
Right.
And my approach to the question is to go to the root meanings of words used. And we find out that in the Hebrew scriptures, there's this huge kaleidoscope of human experience that's described. There are experiences of colonization by what the Sumerians called sky people. There's the experience of governance by draconian entities. There are experiences of close encounters, high technology. There are close encounters into the New Testament. And as soon as you allow yourself to read these texts, other than through the lens of doctrine and dogma, the huge range of phenomena being described becomes quite obvious. But to do the reframing, to do the rethinking, for me, it was the translation of root meanings that got me there. And it was a red pill moment for me. It was like stepping into a new world. And once you've done the translation work and seen how it lines up with other ancestral narratives all around the world, it's all but impossible to go back and read it the old Orthodox way.
See, I was very lucky. I grew up in a very open household with the parents that were very open-minded, and my mom had a Erich Von Daniken, so I stole the copy from her. Erich Von Daniken's Chariots of the God, hardback, first edition. Well, maybe it wasn't first edition, but she has a hardback copy of that. I remember reading that at a young age, and that got me interested in the Bible more than anything I'd ever heard. Because now I'm looking for it, and I look for it from that paleocontact perspective. That's how, and maybe my Christian friends, they grew up with a different perspective than me. I grew up with right away reading the Bible with that perspective.
It was the same for me. I got hold of my dad's copy of Chariots of the Gods when I was 11. And the thing that intrigued me was I felt that Erich Von Daniken, for whatever the faults in that book, had quite reasonably and accurately pinpointed a problem we have in explaining ourselves as an intelligent, conscious species. And he said the story of humanity might make more sense if we allowed for the possibility of external interventions in our development as a species. Well, I loved that idea when I read it at the age of 11. It made perfect sense to me. I didn't know that Erich Von Daniken was not the first person to say it. Plato has said exactly the same thing 2,500 years ago. I did not know that many of the early church fathers of Christianity also believed the same thing before they were all drummed out of town and anathematized. And in a funny way, it led to me becoming a Christian, because I went from those questions to ultimate questions. Erich Von Daniken had moved the question off planet Earth to somewhere else in the cosmos as to where higher consciousness and intelligence came from. And it was as I pursued those questions that led me to asking ultimate questions, questions about God. That took me to Jesus. And in my 33 years in church-based ministry, all the questions that Erich Von Daniken raised were still in my mind, waiting for an adequate answer. And it's only in the recent years that I really got thoroughly into Bible translation that I realized the answer is staring me in the face, hidden in plain sight, in the ancient texts, just waiting to be translated into the public domain.
One of the things I really like you get early on in the book about is something I thought about as a kid, is that Yahweh always reminded me of Smaug in Lord of the Rings. And you get into this. You don't make that comparison, but that's what I thought of as a kid. And that you get into the kind of like the dragon-like description of Yahweh. I'd like to talk about that a little bit, the feathered snake, because this goes into other cultures. I mean, lots of other cultures when you talk about the feathered serpents.
Exactly. If you say feathered serpents, people will straight away think about the Mesoamerican stories from out of the Mayan-based cultures. They'll think of Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Cucumatz, who are physically described as being feathered serpents. Or people might hear feathered serpent and they'll think of the Chinese dragon.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, feathered serpents exist all around the world, and they're in the Bible too. So we have a number of stories and texts that speak about a reptilian entity. The skin is described, the snout is described, destruction by fire is described, the flight feathers are described. But what throws people off when they read the Bible is that they see the holy name of God pasted over the top of those stories. And this draconian entity is given the name of Yahweh. Isn't that the name for God? Isn't that the name for the cosmic source? Yes, it is, but only because in the 6th century BCE, the whole of the Hebrew canon was reworked, edited, redacted to retell the old stories in such a way as to make it appear like a seamless story of God.
Yeah.
And so the holy name of God was pasted over a diversity of stories and encounters. It was pasted over the stories of the Elohim, the powerful ones. It was pasted over the stories of God, the cosmic source. And it was pasted over the stories of dragons who are physically described. And in Echoes of Eden, I argue that the name itself belongs to the global family of dragon narratives. So we mentioned Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, Cucumats. Go to Portugal and Spain, it's the Coca. Go to Georgia, it's the Colchis. Japan has the Kuchu, the Kuchedra. Who else do we have? We've got in Egypt,
China.
Akek. And then you look at the name Yahweh, it looks like a million miles from those names. Now, the names I've mentioned all have this k sound.
Yeah.
It's k or ch or and you look at Yahweh and you think, no relation. Except the name, which in our letters, to translate it into Arabic letters, is YHWH. You insert vowels into that to make it pronounceable, and the H's disappear, Yahweh. But in Proto-Semitic, Proto-Northwest Semitic, you pronounce those H's, it's the same. And so now ask the question, is it possible that the dragon called Yahweh might be similar to Achech, who is the dragon of the Egyptian people?
Right.
And you've got that same sound. And I would suggest that many of these dragon stories have recalled maybe the same sound, if not the same proper name that belongs to these entities. I grew up in the UK, so you're very well read, Jason. So you're reading Lord of the Rings. I was watching TV and watching Noggin the Nog, which is a little cartoon for young kids. But there's Idris the dragon in that, and it's a nice dragon. So it was a cozy story to watch from out of the Dark Ages, but most dragon stories are not nice and cozy. They are stories of human colonies being governed over by draconian entities who have no fellow feeling towards humans, have no compassion towards them. And you go from culture to culture and the same details will repeat, that these entities governed human beings with violence, destroyed people by fire, and wanted the humans to provide them with prodigious quantities of beef, gold, and virgin girls.
Yep.
All the stories are the same. And it's the same in the Bible. That's what the draconian entities wanted there. And you've got stories of a dragon slaying in the Bible, in Bel and the Dragon. You cannot miss the parallels. But the way it's translated, people do. And they don't realize when they find the word serpent or serapion that they're reading about a dragon. It's interchangeable with the word dragon. And then you get into the detail. What does the skin look like? How long is the snout? How does it kill people? How big are the flight feathers? And you've got a lot of detail. So it's one of those things that ought to remind us there's a lot going on in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, that has been translated out of being blindingly obvious. And it's stories of paleocontact.
Reading your book, one of the things you mentioned is I have COVID brain here, is the Israelites basically making fun of, who were they? They were making fun of another, was the Canaanites?
Another culture.
Another culture who pretended to have a dragon, but they had the real one, Yahweh, and they had them in these tents, these huge, immaculate tents. That would, they would say, "Oh, the dragon's inside there," to their people.
Yes, that's right. It's a really interesting moment, and it's in Bel and the Dragon, and yes, the people of God, the Hebrew people, are laughing at the Babylonians. Laughing at the Babylonians. Yeah. Because they have all the accoutrements of dragon worship. They've got the big tent with smoke coming out of it. They've got this entity in there, apparently, that they're feeding with cows, beef, gold, virgin girls, but it's all a sham. And it's exposed in the story that they're just pretending that they've got a dragon there. It's really the priests and the priest families who are eating all the food. Now, what's interesting about that is that some people, when they look at the dragon texts in the Hebrew stories, say, well, no, it's not Yahweh who's eating the beef. It's not Yahweh who's using the virgin girls. It's not Yahweh who wants the gold. This is surely for all his priests. But the story of the Bel and the Dragon says, no, that's the fake version. That's what the Babylonians do. They're pretending to have a dragon. Our Prince Daniel actually slayed their dragon. We really do have one, and his name is Yahweh. So when you put that story in the deuterocanonical book, Bel and the Dragon, alongside the canonical text, it tells you straight away, this is not symbolism. This is not a dress up for priestly culture and priestly privilege. These really are stories about draconian entities that formed part of the Hebrew story and the Hebrew experience in the deep past.
Now, one of the things that, I've seen on Ancient Aliens and myself thought too, is a lot of descriptions of like dragons and the fire and the flight. It could be not a description of a physical dragon, but of a actual spaceship.
Yes.
Is that what we're dealing with here, or are we dealing with two different things? Like some are descriptions of spaceships, some are descriptions of an actual reptilian feathered creature of some kind that could breathe fire or be immensely powerful.
The physical descriptions are very precise, and there are points where Yahweh is describing his own physical appearance. So we can't dance around that and say that text is about technology, because it clearly isn't. But there are other texts where I think you're quite right, Jason. We are looking at our ancestors' memories of advanced tech, and they are describing it in draconian terms. So I think if you go to the Olmec, the Toltec stories, into the Popol Vuh, which is the Mayan story of origins, then you've got really intriguing descriptions of dragons that have metal skin embedded with jewels or lights, and that fly in the night sky with a fire trail behind them that's so bright it's brighter than the moon. Well, I think a modern eye reads that and says, I think that's a rocket-fired space shuttle being described there. Metal skin, fire trail in the sky, brighter than the moon. We have a technological framework to understand phenomena that are being described. Whereas 500 years ago, people would read that and they would just interpret it as a being that looks like it's made of metal, that looks like it trails fire, because they didn't have the technological framework. So I do think we have both the things when we're looking at ancestral narratives. We have ancient tech that gets described as a dragon, but we also have entities that are non-human, powerful entities that governed over humans and that are part of a longer story, because the dragon stories around the world almost always reach the point where the human beings say, we don't want to be governed by this dragon anymore. We're going to confront it and say, no, we're just not going to keep serving you. What's it going to do? It can't kill all of us, because then it's got no one to serve it. Might kill some of us. And this is where the stories go. The confrontation comes, the people band together. They realize that in solidarity, they are more powerful than the dragon. And so history shifts. And then you have human governance, a human society. And that same story is told in the Bible in 2 Samuel. That's not a story of defeating a rocket. It's about defeating a different kind of being, an actual creature.
My other question, reading this, my imagination goes wild on these ideas because I've thought about them for a long time. Is, I mean, I know you can't answer, you don't know for sure, you're just doing the research, but could it possibly be that these ancient dragon-like creatures were physical, real things that survived some kind, all the cataclysms of, the dinosaurs being ripped off, something intelligent, a living creature that now is extinct that ruled over man at some point? Or are these something even more deeper, like interdimensional? That these creatures had a dimensional aspect to them.
Yeah, and might have had another form. I think that's possible. One of the reasons I think the interdimensional question is interesting is that a lot of people who experience contact through altered states of consciousness describe contact with dragon-like entities. And that story is part of ancestral narrative all around the world. Initiation ceremony and shamanic ceremony around the world, you can find these experiences reported. At the same time, if you go to the Popol Vuh, once again, it's pretty nuts and bolts-ish. It's pretty straightforward when it describes the moment when these entities showed up. So the Popol Vuh talks about these entities, it calls them those who engineer, turning up in a craft that hovers in the dark sky over the flood waters of devastated planet Earth. And that story echoes all around the world. You can find it in the Edo narrative from out of Nigeria and Benin. You can find it in the Filipino narrative. You can find it in the biblical narrative, where it talks about this craft turning up. The Filipino narrative says a giant hawk turned up and hovered over the waters and started rehabilitating the land with vortices of wind. Well, was it a hawk or did it look like a hawk? The Genesis story says it hovered like a hawk and uses the word merahefet. So that's why the Filipinos said hawk, because it's just hovering. There's no flapping of wings. And it's there in the Popol Vuh. These entities turn up in a craft and then start doing their work. So that's more nuts and bolt. That's more 3D. Although having said that, to get here, there has to be some kind of subspace or interdimensional aspect to it. We listen to reports from US Defense today, and we hear about UAPs pinging into our airspace. Well, that's some kind of subspace or interdimensional travel. So maybe it's not an either or when we talk about physical entities turning up and then entities that can be experienced through altered states. I happen to believe, because it's so repetitive in cultures around the world, both the oral traditions and the written traditions, and in the artistic and carved traditions, we do have representations that match each other physically quite closely from culture to culture. So I think it would be a stretch to say that every culture has reached for the same metaphor. I would find it more persuasive to say they drew what they saw.
Right. I mean, and you see it in all these different cultures. The snouts, it's so similar. I've talked about this on the show so many times, that dragons are everywhere, every culture, some form. It has to mean something. People are like, oh, come on, you're saying dragons existed once? Yes, I am saying that. There's something to it. Nothing makes that kind of imprint in human psyche and history if it didn't have some kind of form or setting and was real.
Well,
we don't all just make it all up at the same time.
I think there's a sub-story that makes people dismiss some of these ancient stories. And the sub-story that people have bought into is the idea that you and I are clever, but our ancestors were stupid. And because we're clever, we read the old stories as fiction. And because our ancestors were stupid, they told those stories as fact. Well, I would just identify that sub-story straight away and say, where'd you get that idea from, that our ancestors were stupid? And what happens if you listen to those stories on their own terms, instead of you deciding in advance that you know better than the original storytellers? But for me, it really is the correlations that make me sit and listen with more respect. If I only ever heard Nog in the Nog and the stories of Idris, then I would be left thinking it was fiction. But when I see the detail with which these stories repeat from cultures all around the world that in the deep past had no contact with each other, then I have to realize it's not reasonable to think they've all coincidentally invented the same story or created the same metaphor. That doesn't make sense.
No, and that's what I'm saying. It's just there's no way that it can be just a coincidence that all these civilizations have the same mythological creature fascination. You know what I'm saying? And it's through all of our our fictions. I mean, when I was a kid, Dragon Slayer. Remember that movie from the 80s? I loved that movie. But it's something in our psyche when it comes to dragons. I think it's buried deep down that we know there's something real to it. We haven't let go of the idea of dragons.
Yes,
and to think
right.
that they could be something this powerful. I mean, then there's a whole reptilian subject. I mean, people have encountered reptilian humanoid looking creatures. Do you think it was something like that, or do you think it really was a big looking like dragon-like creature? Or was it like a draconian humanoid that would just people like, ooh, dragon person? I mean,
I think a whole range of entities may have existed. Some that looked more human than others, and some that would have looked more draconian than others.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to think that we're being told a spectrum of experience. But I mean, you mentioned the telling of truth in fiction. We do it today. I mean, if you watch the recent Marvel movies, and if you've read any ancient texts, ancient mythologies, read Greek mythology, Norse mythology, if you've read Plato, you will know that the script writers are retelling ancient story in the modern Marvel movies. I was watching The Eternals with my kids just the other day, and I kept saying, that's in my book. That's in Echoes of Eden. And in the end, I had to leave the room because they just wanted to watch the movie.
Shut up, Dad.
It was so clear that this was a retelling of ancient story and a representation of Plato's teaching in fiction. Now, I absolutely applaud that. And I think that when we do that, these things land in our psyche. We resonate with it because we know there's something more to it than I'm just being told a story. And we are not the first generation to do that. Embedding memory within fiction is something human beings have always done. So if you go back to a dragon story and say, this is a fiction, why is it resonating with me in the way it is? Why have cultures all around the world curated these stories so carefully? And chances are it's because the old script writers were just as clever as the new script writers, and they have embedded cultural memory in the context of a story so that it won't be forgotten, and so that the lessons won't be forgotten. Because the real take home of the dragon stories is about solidarity. That if we can give each other peer-to-peer solidarity, we do not have to be abused by autocratic leadership, whether it's human or draconian.
Yeah, I mean, in China, they call the ruling families the Dragon Dynasty. I mean, it is a fight for power. The dragons, what do they want? They want gold. They want gorgeous amount of food. They want, like you list in the Bible, the amount of food they get, and they want virgins. Like they want all the most valuable stuff, right? Gold and virgins,
yes.
Right?
Yes, that's right.
But
same as all the royal families around the world, of course.
Exactly. And I mean, look back. They found mines that go back 100,000 years or more, where pre-civilization, where we're digging for gold and we're digging for uranium and we're digging for mines. They found these in different parts of the world. And why did humans always have an obsession with gold before metallurgy even? You know what I'm saying? Some other creature gave us that influence. Some other entity ruled over us and made us as slaves and mined for it and brought the gold. When I was a kid, my mom would read to me The Hobbit. And the reason I was so fascinated with that story was I could just get up to Smaug. I mean, God, you talk about all the hobbits and their lineage. I want to get to the dragon, man. There's something in a young age. It's built in our psyche. In this book, you really hit home on the fact of how civilization has just, by different civilizations conquering others, wiped out their history for control. wiped out their stories, their rituals, their traditions for control, but that these rituals and traditions brought us to a state or higher cognitive ability that they want to suppress. This is, I think, the main theme of your book, is the human potential being suppressed by destroying these narratives, destroying this history that we don't know about, but truth prevails. You point this out in your book, and it does through our psyche, through these archetypes, these stories that are fiction. It's trying to get through the truth. I don't know what the truth is, but I can see the hints of it through all the storytelling, through all the archetypes and things we've built as a society. It's there. It's hidden in different meanings and symbolisms.
Well, Jason, you have summarized the book Echoes of Eden beautifully there. That's absolutely right. I think that's
why I love the book.
Thank you. The suppression is to do with suppressing our understanding of our own power, suppression of our understanding of our cognitive abilities, and just how intelligent and conscious we can be and have always been. And so when people ask me, well, why would governments want to hide information about human origins? Well, it's because the human origins narratives have implications for you and me today. It's not just a story about where we came from, it's an understanding of who we are. And it happens, as you say, in moments of colonization. We're very fortunate to be able to talk about the Popol Vuh and talk about this story that
we're lucky.
Gives us a more empowered understanding of who we are, where we came from, what we can be. But there was a period when that story was unknown. The powers thought they had incinerated that story. Exactly. When Portugal and Spain went into Central and South America, they literally incinerated the libraries of the writing-based cultures that were there. Mayan culture was a literary culture. They had vast libraries that were full of books that carried their cultural heritage, and the Spanish burnt them to the ground. And you can still read the official reports.
Killed the translators too.
And killed the translators, so that in case any of those texts survived, no one would be able to read them.
Yep.
Now, I'm sure a few choice copies found their way to the Vatican Library and the Library of the King of Spain, but nobody else was to have that information. But what we now know is that some texts did survive, and they were held in secret, possibly literally underground, by an underground priesthood for 200 years.
Yep.
Before some very brave priests, the descendants of the priesthood of the Feathered Serpent, took a copy to a very brave Dominican friar working in Guatemala in the parish of Chichicastenango. And he was a true Dominican who was a real scholar, and he loved the people who served, and he knew how to sit with the local people and learn from them. And so there was that trust and respect for them to say to him, would you be interested in our story of beginnings? And he said, yes, I would. And he spent years translating it into Spanish, and what emerged was what he called the People's Book, the Popol Vuh, presented as story, but full of alternative information about who we are and our true power as human beings. The colonizing powers had wanted to extinguish that information, first of all, because it wanted to have full spectrum dominance over the culture it had conquered. It wanted to be the education department, the science department, the news department, and say what's what in every respect. It didn't want alternative news agencies saying, no, that's not what happened. Or it didn't want alternative religious leaders saying, no, this is actually what's going on in the cosmos. Could not be contradicted. Full spectrum dominance, every other authority executed, every other source incinerated. 200 years later, it resurfaces, and we know what it was they were trying to get rid of. Now, that's just one case in point.
Right.
And in Echoes of Eden, I point out that this pattern of suppression of local narratives is ages old. It happens in every age, in every century. I went to Brazil in the 1980s, and I saw in real time what that suppression looks like as Pope John Paul II was trying to remove all the indigenous elements from Catholic practice and all the African elements from Catholic practice, And what he was doing there was exactly the same as what King Josiah was doing in Jerusalem in the 7th century BCE, trying to get rid of all the other stories. And the stories they're trying to get rid of are the same. They are stories of paleocontact, stories that explain how was it we went from animal subsistence to building cities and building a civilization. And so the huge picture that emerges in Echoes of Eden is that there is a narrative that exists all around the globe. You can go anywhere on the planet. If you dig deep and find the local narratives, the same stories will emerge. And then you realize that whoever is in power there has been working hard to get rid of that narrative for as long as you can remember. So it's the persistence of the suppression and the persistence of the survival of those stories that you come away with an awed respect, knowing that that's what's happened. And it really gives you the energy and the impulse to go back and say, all right, I'm going to sit at the feet of the traditional guardians of these ancient stories and give them another hearing, because there's something here with real power in it.
You point out, I mean, the idea of that, even the idea of calling people witches, like the elderly woman in the woods is a witch. It's just so the church could, don't listen to the knowledgeable elderly person. It probably has a lot more answers than we do. The church has done nothing but suppress. And it's not just the Christian church. I mean, you can go to Buddhist, you can go to Muslim, you can go to all the big religions, and they've all done something to suppress another religious concept or history or destroy their temples. It's not just one religion. But, the Catholic Church has done a lot of work on it. And they have a library full of stuff that they still kept secret. And it's not that long ago that they were killing children in Canada. Okay? I mean, the history is not that old.
No, the history is not that old. And you mentioned the killing of children in Canada. There is now a Truth and Reconciliation process in progress that has revealed that over a 100-year period, church and state, hand in hand, kidnapped at least 150,000 First Nation Canadians. So there it is. It's not just any old Canadian child. No, First Nation Canadian children, 150,000 kidnapped, imprisoned in detention centers, euphemistically called boarding schools. Only now we know what happened in those boarding schools. More than 10,000 of those children were murdered by nuns and priests whose job it was to take these children and dislocate them from their indigenous heritage and program them with Orthodox Christianity. And when I say program, it was brutal. Kidnapping a child at the age of 6 is bad enough. Shaving all their hair off when they get there is a horrible assault, and that had to do with cutting off knowledge of higher powers that was part of those cultures, knowledge of how to access higher cognitive powers. They weren't allowed to use their own names. If they were not pliable, then they would be put into solitary confinement, and a number of children committed suicide because of the brutality of that regime. Now, that's not just a story of Canada, because the same period, if you look at 1880 to 1980, that was happening in Canada. The stolen generation was happening in Australia. It's almost exactly the same story. And in the USA, while tribes were being relocated, children were being kidnapped, the government had taken the measure of illegalizing initiation ceremony to stop the transfer of information.
Yep.
So here's the thing. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada has said this was clearly an attempt at cultural genocide to discontinue the indigenous cultures of Canada. And that illegalization makes very clear, and the cutting of hair makes very clear, it's not just to try and stop indigenous peoples existing as a distinct ethnographic group, it's to stop the information flow. They believed if they could stop initiation for 3 or 4 generations, then all the information would be lost. and indigenous people wouldn't be able to do what their ancestors could do and wouldn't know what their ancestors knew. The fact that it's the same 100-year period across those three countries, the USA, Canada, and Australia, ought to make you stop and think, how was that coordinated? Why was that done? And if you come to Australia, you'll realize the stolen generation policy has not really and truly stopped.
No.
It's done more subtly today, but the attempt is ongoing to extinguish the information.
Well, point that out. No, point that out, because you make a good point of that in the book. I'm not trying to give away the whole book. I'm sorry. But I can't help it. You make a good point about, I can't remember your friend, but how they were totally rewrote a school book just recently.
Yes,
about the Aboriginal history.
Exactly.
About them having arrows and bows and yeah.
That's right. This is only about 20 years ago that the New South Wales Department of Education brought out a history book that had a painting that represented something that was described in Captain Cook's journal when he turned up to Australia for the British Crown. And it was described about this man walking by the shore with a bow and arrow. And there was the painting in the textbook showing it. And then the book was pulled and it was replaced with a book that didn't have that picture in it because it was regarded as being unhelpful to the meta-narrative that Australia was terra nullius with very basic, primitive people living here who were probably grateful to be conquered and genocided here and there.
Yeah, everybody's just so grateful to be conquered and genocided out. Oh, yeah.
I had somebody say that to me today in the comments on the Fifth Kind TV. The Aboriginal Australians should have been grateful because they were starving to death before the Australians arrived, was what this person said.
Sure.
Oh, my goodness. Read some history, for goodness sake. There are many reasons for colonization, and compassion is never one of them. So get real, for goodness sake.
God.
But no, apparently a bow and arrow couldn't be shown because that was too technological. And it doesn't matter that it's history, that Captain Cook wrote about it. We can't portray Aboriginal Australians as being that clever. Otherwise, it makes the colonization appear too violent. And so they changed history for the next generation of school children going through the education system in Australia. Well, my friend Stephen Strong was involved in the world of education at that time, and that really was a turning point for him. And he's become a champion for Aboriginal Australian culture and story. And I have some fascinating conversations with him and his son, Evan, in my book, Echoes of Eden, to talk about what has been forgotten and remembered, what has survived, what are the protocols that relate to higher abilities, accessing human potential. What is it exactly that the conquering powers have wanted to shut down? And so I'm very fortunate to have access to Stephen and Evan and the people with whom they're in contact. I've been very blessed with contact with, I call him Troy in the book, I don't use his real name, but he's a guardian of Navajo culture and Navajo initiation tradition, who shows me what the incredible overlap is between their protocols, their human technologies, and those of Aboriginal Australia and those of Western and Southern Africa. And I draw out all those parallels in Echoes of Eden to say it's not just stories that repeat, but it is protocols to heighten human intelligence and human consciousness and human ability. And you start joining those dots and you realize our indigenous peoples have so much to offer us if we're willing to just put our prejudices to one side, put aside the meta-narrative that they've all been grateful that they've been shut down and taken over and stolen and cut off from their ancestors. That is where you go when you want to hear the forgotten secrets of the human story.
And that's the thing. The question is, you point out in the book, this has all happened around the same time period for the Native Americans, the Aboriginals. Sorry. But is it purposeful, or is that just the way humans roll? Because, you can go throughout history and see where civilizations have genocided other civilizations and just rewritten their cultures. The Catholic Church made sure the early Christian faith of the Cathars was obliterated. And we're gonna be coming up a commercial break. I really would like to get into the Cathars and Gnostic teachings, because when I was in my early 20s, and I did discover, I like what Jesus says. I don't like any of the other stuff, the Old Testament. I got into the Gnostic teachings. That's I consider myself agnostic when I question my spiritual. I don't question God or Jesus and that, but I question everything else. Everything's up for debate for me. Because all history has been rewritten, lost, or suppressed. And all we can do is research and try to find the answer. So I don't know. I don't have the answers. I don't think anybody really has the total answer thing. We're trying to piece this together. But I really got into the Gnostic texts because they're a way different version of Christianity than what we know of today. And I can see why the Catholic Church wanted to destroy it completely, because it was definitely against everything, their control factor. The Cathars lived in a very peaceful society. They believed in the human ascension, human individual power, and ascension. That doesn't bode well for a Catholic Church that wants you to believe in heaven and hell, and that you have to obey and tithe to them, and do what they say. That was not what the Cathars were about. And they obliterated them.
And you're right. It's the empowering stories that got shut down. And so you had Gnostic texts that I think had very empowering information in them about human beings and what we're capable of. And the Cathars were people who had derived a lot of information from those Gnostic sources. But there are remnants of that information in the canonical texts as well, in the Gospels and in the New Testament. And in Echoes of Eden, I point out that interdimensional contact with other entities who want to support you individually on your journey, that's not just something you'll find from a shaman in Southern Africa. It's there in the New Testament. The idea that you can have interdimensional contact with your ancestors, that's in the New Testament. And so even though it's there in the official text, it was silenced by being ignored. And then all of a sudden, you get to medieval France, as you mentioned, to the Languedoc, and you find a people group who have gone to those texts, who've gone to the Gnostic texts, who've gone to Plato, who've gone to the Hermetic texts, and not only believed them, but they have put together a lifestyle and protocols for putting that information to work. And what it translated into was a better world in the Languedoc. If you went there in the 1200s, you would suddenly find yourself in a little bubble, absent of the high rates of crime and murder that were typical in medieval Europe. That's why they were called the Cathars. It meant the good people, or the pure ones. That's how their neighbors regarded them. We usually fear what's different. The Cathars had people's respect. And you ask, Jason, is it deliberate, or is this just the pattern of colonization, this, that, and the other? I think the story of the Cathars shows you just how deliberate it is. Right. Because it was an onslaught that lasted 100 years, 19 successive popes, in order to rid Europe of, historians estimate, up to 1 million people. The first genocide in recorded history, in order to get rid of the information that they carried and to get rid of the empirical evidence that it worked, that it was information with power.
And that's it. Information is power. And if you don't think that's still not true today, then you haven't been paying attention. Because a lot of people are upset about Elon Musk buying Twitter. What is that about? What is that about? He says he wants to have a free speech platform, and people are, either loving it or upset. Either way. I mean, information's power. Somebody doesn't spend $43 billion on a social media platform for just kicks. You know what I'm saying? What's his name? Bezos doesn't buy the Washington Post just for fun. Information's power. Saudi Arabia didn't have huge amounts of stock in Twitter. I said Twitch earlier, sorry, Twitter, for no reason. Control of information is power, and we are witnessing that every day. We have now a ministry of disinformation, or a ministry of truth, pretty much you want to call it, in America forming. Right, a playbook right out of 1984. Information is power, and who controls it wields all the power. Because it's influence over everybody who's barely paying attention.
Exactly. And Echoes of Eden points out that access to information is a vital issue in every age and every culture. You can go to so many moments in history where you're looking at a dual track of information. One set of information for those in power, one set of information for everybody else. And That's as true today as it was in the 1500s and in the deep past. But I'm really intrigued by the Twitter thing. I love the idea of open source algorithms. I love the idea of greater freedom of speech. Is that the only reason it's been acquired by Elon Musk? He's a very interesting guy. Is it just that there's a personal beef between him and Mark Zuckerberg? That could be part of it. I guess we're waiting to find out, aren't we?
Yeah, my thing is that it just exposed how biased things have been. And I'm the person I cannot stand. I don't want to get into politics because I can't stand either side. And that's the thing. There shouldn't be sides. We're all fighting with each other, and we don't realize how we're being controlled. You know, it's a big game. It's a big game, and information's the power. And when you see them struggling over it like they are and fighting over it this bad, and people accusing each other of fake news, you realize they just want us fighting. They don't want you to know, and anybody to know the truth on either side. They just want us fighting with each other. And the only way they can do that is if they can control that information flow and keep putting out sensational headlines to make you triggered and fight with each other and be mad at the other person has a slightly different opinion than yours. Might actually find more common ground, but nope, you're too busy fighting and yelling at each other, calling each other names on Twitter. I don't have Twitter.
That's exactly right. I think it's just a modern illustration of the general principle that those in power want to control the narrative.
Yep. And and nothing's changed. It's the same old story. It's still happening today. We're going to commercial break and open up the phone lines. Got a lot more to talk about. Like I said, if I can make it through this here. When we come back, phone lines will be open. We're talking with our guest, Paul Anthony Wallis, talking about his books, Escaping from Eden, Scars of Eden, and released today, Echoes of Eden, when we come back from the short commercial break.
Effects of sensory deprivation and hallucinatory drugs. The subject of the experiment is himself, and the experiment is out of control. Ken Russell's Altered States, a film that must not be missed, is in the West End now. Altered States, Certificate X.
Do you wish for more paranormal and spiritual content? The Paranormal Chronicles magazine is a free digital magazine crammed with the very best in paranormal and spiritual articles and features. No sign-up, no subscription, just free reading and knowledge for you. Read today at www.theparanormalchronicles.com/magazine.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope.
That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Paranation Magazine is a new paranormal magazine based out of Denver, Colorado. Our goal isn't just to give you the best paranormal content out there, but to promote paranormal unity. We're doing this by giving everyone an opportunity to tell their stories and to share their experiences. For more information, follow us on Facebook at Paranation Magazine and soon, paranationmag.com.
I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like is the extraordinary travels of a young, alone, and broke psychic in the highly anticipated new book from internationally renowned psychic, medium, medical intuitive, and best-selling author Sherry Dillard. Critics have described I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like as an engrossing memoir, an empowering story of how a broken girl came to accept her psychic gift, a refreshing and fun read. I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like is available through Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold.
Edgar Allan Poe wrote Spirits of the Dead with a pen dipped in warm blood. You will see the ultimate in terror with this important all-star cast. Brigitte Bardot, Alain Delon, Jane Fonda, Terence Stamp, and Peter Fonda in Edgar Allan Poe's Spirits of the Dead. Only Poe's demented genius could bring to the screen such horror and evil. Spirits of the Dead stars Brigitte Bardot, Alain Delon, Jane Fonda, Terence Stamp, and Peter Fonda. Directed by three masters of the cinema, Federico Fellini, Louis Malle, and Roger Vadim. Spirits of the Dead is an adventure in terror beyond your wildest nightmares. Spirits of the Dead in color is rated R.
Please, Spock, do me a favor. And don't say it's fascinating. No. But it is interesting.
You're listening to Paranormal Soup, bringing you the weird every Sunday night. Call into the show and join the discussion. The call-in lines are 219-230-4444 or 260-225-9419 or by Skype caller ID 00JBland00 or JBland Paranormal Soup. And now to your host, Jason Bland.
Tonight's guest is Paul Anthony Wallis, author of Escaping from Eden, Scars of Eden, and now his newest book that released today, Echoes of Eden. And yes, let me make sure the phone lines are open for you guys tonight. I believe I am off of Do Not Disturb. Yes, you can call into the show, join the discussion. I'd love to hear from you tonight. If you believe you've had an ET contact, we're talking about paleocontact tonight, ancient alien contact, but Paul delves into his own experiences with ET contact, and he, like me, just trying to discover what it is that might have happened. You know, I've had my own experiences that I'm still struggling with to understand. I think Paul is too, and he gets a little bit in this book. He talks about other people's experience. Paleo contact, well, guess what? They're still in contact, is my opinion. Many people have called in the show describing the guests we've had on. I don't think the ETs ever left. Are they the same ones that were responsible for our creation? They're contacting people now? I don't know. There's different aliens out there contacting people? I don't know. We're all trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And that's what Paul's doing in these books. And the one thing I love about this new book is the fact that we've been suppressed over the centuries, thousands of years actually, of our human potential. And why? Why is that? Or what is behind that force that has suppressed this knowledge that we can be so much more than what we are? We can get into all that tonight. Like I said, the phone lines are open. Let's go ahead and get back to our guest. Now, Paul, you do start out the book a little bit about your own personal experience when it comes to extraterrestrial contact. Me and you have talked a little bit, about, I want to say, and you have other people in this book, their experiences, how you're trying to discover what it is. You don't have the, like you said, like you make the Whitley Strieber comparison, what he had to go on Larry King and get laughed at, and he had, such detailed experiences. Me and you, we have experiences that we're just still trying to grasp what actually might have happened. But to come out with that is extraordinary in this book. I feel like you really put yourself personally more into this book out of the three.
Well, yes, I felt I really had to do that, partly out of a debt to all those who have read The Scars of Eden, because I kind of tease the reader in The Scars of Eden with my own experience. They want to know what it is, and there's this thread that goes through the whole of The Scars of Eden, giving little bits away at a time. And it really echoes my own experience as I have understood a little bit more at a time experiences from my own past. When we get into Echoes of Eden, I knew I had to explain myself a little more. And I think the value in doing it is that there are those who have very dramatic, graphic experiences like Whitley Strieber, and who very courageously have shared those stories. But the reason I want to share my experience is because I think there are many people around the world who've had puzzling experiences, that they're not sure what happened, or they only remember the first few moments of what happened. And I want to encourage people with those kinds of experiences to own what they remember and to be willing to talk about it. Because I think if we were willing to share those kinds of experiences and listen without prejudice, there wouldn't be a family or a friendship circle anywhere that wouldn't have a contact experience in it. But we need to be willing to share these less impressive, less dramatic stories without a punchline. And my stories are like that. I had a number of experiences when I was 20 that I didn't know what they were. And I didn't have a framework for understanding them. I was just going into the world of ministry at that time, and I had quite a buttoned down evangelical view on life. And I had boxes for God, the devil, angels, demons, human, animal, vegetable, mineral, and nothing else. The whole of the universe had to fit into those boxes. And so when I had an experience that wouldn't fit, well, then I had a problem. And so I had an experience that for many years I thought, well, that was frightening. Those entities shouldn't have been in my house. If it was frightening, an aberration of some kind, I'll have to call that demonic. Or that encounter felt elevating, so I'll call that angelic. But all the time I knew, no, those are not the right descriptors. Something else was going on there. And it's only in recent years, through doing research into paleocontact, ancestral narratives, that I realized there were dozens of other boxes and labels you could use to describe experience and get a handle on it. And I go back to those experiences when I was 20, and I realize, oh my goodness, I think what that actually was a close encounter of the fourth kind. What that actually was, I think, was an encounter with what people call small greys. I think this other was an experience of what people call Nordics. But as you say, I'm really feeling my way forwards in this territory because I had the experiences. I didn't understand them at the time. I'm trying to understand what happened. And I find a lot of people who contact me for coaching are in that exact space. They've had an experience that in some way unsettled them or changed their life, and it may be decades later and they still haven't been able to process it, get their heads around it, or know if it's only them who's ever had this experience. And 100% of the time when people contact me, because of my research, I'm able to say, it's not only you. Not only have I read of your experience in ancestral narratives that are thousands of years old, but I've spoken to many people whose experiences are just like yours. And even that is enough to give people cause to heave a sigh of relief and then begin to think without that sense of fear and pressure, all right, well, I wonder what that was then, and just think it through.
We got somebody waiting on the phone line. We're going to get to your call in just a second. I do have somebody in the chat room ask this question. I think it's good. Jason, this is from A Special Power. Jason, can you ask your guest his thoughts on why lifetime abduction and family line abductions? I guess he's asking why the family line abductions, which seems to be a common occurrence.
I think when we look at patterns in contemporary close encounter experiences, it is possible to see that there is a pattern of family lines being followed. I think we have a lot of company, and I think some of the company that comes here is interested in us to the point that they're studying us. Just in the same way that we study ducks and we abduct a duck from time to time and put a little tag on it so that we can see where they go, how far they fly, how persistent their group life is, what they eat, etc., etc. I think we're being studied in a fashion rather like that. And it may be for that reason that particular family lines are followed. I think there may be family lines where people have a particular wiring, a particular sensitivity that means it is possible to have more communication, perhaps. And so that's why close encounters might follow a family line. And a lot of people have experiences not knowing that they are in a family line of experiencers. So I've had quite a few people come to me who are in their 30s in particular, and they will share their experience. And I'll often ask, have either of your parents had an experience like this? Oh, I don't think so, they'll say. No, I've never heard anything like that. And then a week later, they're on another Skype call saying, I spoke to my dad and he said, oh, since you've told me that, I'll tell you what happened to me when I was 15. And it happened to your grandfather as well. These stories are held that tightly that parents don't tell their children.
Right.
Because
they don't tell anybody.
They might think this is crazy. I don't know what sense to make of it. Why would I tell my poor son that the world he lives in is even less predictable than he thought it was? I had a friend the other day who had read Echoes of Eden, and he loved the book, and he was visiting his dad, and his dad met me a couple of times, and so he asked my friend, what's Paul up to these days? And so my friend hesitantly told his dad, oh, Paul's actually writing about paleocontact these days. And his dad said, hold on a moment. And he left the room and he came back with a box. He opened the box and he said, these are the drawings your grandfather made in the 1950s when he had a series of close encounters.
Wow.
Now, my friend is in his 40s and he had never heard this story before. That's how closely these stories are held. So many people are part of a family line that's being observed, being visited, and they don't know, because sometimes parents don't tell these stories because they're trying to protect their children. But it's very much a pattern. Why? I don't know is the short answer, but it may be for reasons very similar to the reasons for which we study ducks or other wildlife.
I mean,
they're wanting to get to know us.
Look at the Bible. I mean, obviously, they were following genetic lines.
Of course.
In the Bible. You know, there's something to it. I mean, royal blood, you know, the monarchy, it was all based upon this, you know,
bloodlines.
They have this bloodlines, you know, something that there's important with bloodlines. Now, we got somebody waiting on the phone I want to get to. 480 area code. Who do we got? I had to call them back. Who do we got on the line?
Hey, Jason, it's Zach. How you feeling tonight, brother?
Oh, I'm hanging in there barely. Luckily, I had good guest tonight for this.
Your Christmas present from Wuhan, China came in 2 years late. So
yeah, a little late.
I know. Been there,
better than
done
never,
that,
right? We got away with it once. Liam's now had it twice. He, you know, the first time he didn't give it to us. This time he got it, and then we all got it. So it's been fun. Not really.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I have 2 questions tonight. I'll keep them as short as possible. Hey, Paul, it's always good to see you, sir.
Hi, Zach.
My first question goes back to really the idea of like a higher race that once enslaved humanity and all that. When I was hearing the conversation that was going on, I kept thinking back to the hierarchy that the plantation slave system had here in the United States. You had the plantation owner at the top, you had overseers right there in the middle, and then you had just the general slave population right there over on the bottom. My question is, during this time, or based on your research that you found, were there any kind of overseers when humanity was enslaved by these higher beings? And if so, is there any evidence to point out that maybe the descendants of maybe these overseers are maybe a part of the 1% currently today?
Oh, yes, that really is an intriguing question.
Yeah, really deep rabbit hole to go down there on that one.
I think I'll start off by saying that ancient story does suggest a number of different demographics visiting us at different times, and there being periods where there were different demographics here at the same time, and that suggests there was some kind of pecking order. So if you have the stories from out of Genesis 6, for instance, of hybridization, which echoes the story of the Igigi from the Sumerian narratives, and hybridization stories from around the world, it suggests that those who came in that moment to do hybridization did not have the authority to do that, that there was already a power structure here in place. So you've got that hint. As to tiers of authority, where you've got this demographic serving this demographic, I haven't really picked that up in the biblical or the Sumerian or the Mesoamerican or the African stories. I hear that more in contemporary report. People who have encounters with small greys get the impression that they are here in the authority structure and that there are others here. When you listen to stories of the Sky Council in the Hebrew tradition, it seems that there is more a peer-to-peer thing going on among the demographics, but with one ruling demographic that seems to have the dibs on Project Earth and Project Humanity. Now, the persistence question is fascinating because I grew up being told the story of the Princess and the Pea. I don't know if you know that story, Zach. I don't know if it's told in the States, but it's a story that really builds on the idea that if you are a king or a queen or a prince or a princess, you cannot marry an ordinary, regular human being. You have to keep the bloodline pure. Royals can only marry royals. And that story is only like a fictionalized version of what's real, that you could follow the royal story of any culture around the world. Right. And the idea of keeping the bloodline pure is very important. Well, you might say, surely not. Surely Meghan breaks that storyline. No, she doesn't, actually. And this was broken in the British press a couple of years ago, that there had to be some connection with royal bloodline for even Meghan to qualify to be allowed into briefly into the royal family. So it's there, maintain the bloodlines pure, which is why when you go back to the 1500s, there were some very odd looking kings and queens of Europe because they were suffering the disadvantages of a narrow gene pool. So where does that idea come from? You know, with such potential disadvantage, why is there this rule that you can't marry an ordinary human being? Now, I think the short answer is that the agenda is to keep power in the hands of a very few families and not dilute it, not lose it, not disperse that power. But it raises the possibility that this persistence of family lines is more than hundreds of years old, maybe thousands of years old, and that maybe the monarchy structures we have, rather like some of the priestly structures we have, were actually set up in the time when we were governed over by non-human beings, by Anunnaki, by Sumerian sky people, and that these power structures have simply persisted in all the time since. Our ancestors, I think, have always said we cannot have a full understanding of what's happening on planet Earth until we realize there's a non-human layer to the governance of planet Earth. Put those things together, and I think a very interesting picture emerges. And I think I'll probably stop there.
David Icke thinks it's because they're all reptilians and they have to have the DNA
to
be possessed by the reptilian entities. Let's go down his deep rabbit hole on that. But maybe
my next question.
Yeah, go
anyway,
for it, Zach.
Okay, so my question kind of piggybacks off of something that Jason had said earlier about two different sides basically manipulating events going on. I'm personally one that believes that a lot of the major events that have occurred throughout history and that are ongoing right now, that they're all pre-planned out by the elite 1% in order to maintain control. My question is, based on your research, is there any evidence that these higher beings, when they did have control over humanity, did they manipulate events, politics, economics, religion, cultural, social norms, anything like that to establish control?
Yes, I can think of one example straight away, and it's from the Hebrew scriptures. And there's a moment when a king wants to know how to progress his interests militarily. Is it a good time to go to war with his neighbor? And he has a prophet, Micaiah, who says that he just remote viewed the Sky Council to find out what they were doing. Now, very often the Sky Council turns up in the Hebrew stories because they are fomenting wars. And that's exactly what they're doing in this remote viewing. And on that intergalactic federation, to use the language of Hay Mashed, was a range of entities, including archonic entities that could manipulate human leadership. They could go down and make them more aggressive, make them more likely to go into a foolhardy an ill-fated conquest attempt, could rile them up, or could go down and make people fearful. So as soon as you've got those kinds of stories, archonic entities, energy-based beings who can go down and manipulate human beings into an aggression, then I think we're getting close to answering your question. And in the Scars of Eden, I talk about this. When you look at the history of war, certainly when you get to the 20th century and look at the decisions that took us into war, and then look at what some of the elite families, the royal families, and the banking families were doing, I think quite a complex picture emerges, to be honest. But part of the picture is that there can be decisions made with no sense of fellow feeling towards humanity at large. Decisions taken that will benefit a few families economically. If we go into that war, we stand to get more money, more power. Maybe thousands of people will be slaughtered, maybe millions of people will be slaughtered, but we'll come out of it well. And when you realize that there is thinking like that at the elite level, you have to ask, where does that mentality come from? How can they operate with such a lack of compassion? Does David Icke have the answer? Is it the psychological aftermath of being governed by non-human entities? Or is it because there are other powers pulling the strings behind closed doors? And I would just say what many ancestral narratives say, what you can find in the work of Robert Kirk from the 1600s. Presbyterian minister wrote this book, so a very conservative kind of guy, but having listened to the indigenous stories of Scotland, he wrote a book saying there is an invisible layer to the governance of humanity that is not human. And I think you have to go there to understand some of these more inhumane decisions that I think you can see best represented in the history of war.
All right. Cool. Well, that's all the questions that I had. Paul, it's always a pleasure to see you over on the show, and thank you so much for answering my questions. I do greatly appreciate it. And Jason, I hope you feel better soon, man. Don't forget to take your ivermectin.
All right,
Thanks,
man.
Zach.
Have a good night. And now I'm going to get banned from YouTube. Thanks, Zach. Control of information, people. One of the things, too, you bring up in this book, too, is, you talk about war and the powers that be, is if they didn't think this information of the ancient past wasn't important, they wouldn't send soldiers to recover artifacts in Iraq. We've talked about this with archaeologist Dr. Heather Lynn, where she's found evidence that our government sent soldiers on missions into Iraq during the Iraq War to recover artifacts. Sumerian artifact. What business would our government have with that? Why would we putting men's lives at risk for artifacts? And you actually have somebody who testifies to that in the book.
Exactly. I've heard from a number of people who were in Iraq as part of the 2003 incursion who came back with heaps of questions like that. They contact me, and they often lead with the question, what do I know about portals? Because that is part of the report that they've heard as they've listened to peers as they've returned, because they went in believing they were going in for all the public reasons, to sequester weapons of mass destruction, to save the Kurds from annihilation, to effect regime change. Then they got there and found their particular unit was not on any of those missions. They were on an archaeological mission, sequestering archaeological artifacts, uplifting from the country to take them to Israel or the USA. So now they want to know why. Why am I risking my life and the life of my men for archaeological artifacts? What's their relevance? And so they come back asking questions. What's there? What is the heritage of that place? What is the history of that place that we should be so interested in those items? And then the portals question comes up because they've heard that from other units. And I can answer that not through having been hands-on or eyes-on, although I've heard from people who've been in that position with regard to stargates and portals. What I can say is there's credibility to it, firstly because portals and wormholes are real science. The Einstein-Rosen bridge is a real thing. And because portals have been studied by NASA, the Advanced Propulsion Unit has been studying a portal above planet Earth for more than 30 years. They've flown around it. It's that empirically real. They've measured how much matter travels through it on an 8-minute cycle. So it's objectively real. And then if you go to the accounts of the deep past, you have stories of portals, stargates from the ancient Sumerian cultures, from the Hebrew culture, and they place them geographically on the planet's surface in Iraq. So if you were a power interested in sequestering an ancient portal, where would you go? You would go to Iraq if you sat at the feet of our ancestral teachings. And it relates to eyes-on testimony that I've heard and to a lot of report that veterans of war have fed to me when they've spoken to me on the topic. Now, it's hard for people to come to this who are outside of those circles, but that's why I spell it out very, very carefully in Echoes of Eden, step by step, showing the validity of the concept and then showing how it relates to ancient testimony and experience in the present day.
You know, the conspiracy theory has been going on for years now, that the whole war in Iraq and everything, even 9/11, was all manufactured to get us into Iraq to recover a Stargate. That's like the conspiracy Reddit theory, you know. But sometimes there's truth to theories, and it makes you wonder when we're spending so much time, when we're supposed to be, remember 2003? Pepperidge Farm remembers, we were looking for weapons of mass destruction. We were looking for weapons of mass destruction. Do you think we were that serious about weapons of mass destruction when we're sending teams in to get artifacts from ancient Samaria? You know?
There are many reasons for every war, and you would have to have a few before you thought it was really worthwhile. We now know that the weapons of mass destruction aspect was false.
Yeah.
And it was very damaging to international relations because the national leaders of other countries were effectively lied to. But that doesn't mean that there weren't other secular reasons to go in, and I know Tony Blair would still say it was the right thing to do because we had to effect a regime change. Well, that's fine, but within 2 weeks, we're digging up Gilgamesh's tomb. So don't tell me that wasn't one of the reasons. If you see what I mean, that takes a lot of planning and forethought. You don't go into a war for weapons of mass destruction, regime change to save the Kurds and say, you know, just offhandedly, oh, I wonder if while we were there, we could go to that archaeological dig. It was part of the mission. There was a unit there within 2 weeks of going into the country.
I think it was the mission.
It was one of the reasons at the very least, and it was that important that it was done and then that it was suppressed.
And obviously, it was important enough, I mean, majorly important enough for us to go in, send military units in to cover this stuff, to dig up the great... What do you think they actually did find? Because you see all these internet post about the Gilgamesh, tomb, and they show like, there's fake pictures and stuff out there of like this is the Gilgamesh or whatever resurrected or like in its stasis and stuff like that. Do you think they found anything when they went there, like a body of an ET? You know what I'm saying, or of an ancient ruler?
I think if you just Google this and you see what's in the public domain and apply logic to what you're looking at, I think it's inevitable that we found something, and that's why the story was suppressed, because it was a public story right up to the moment where we now have the chance to examine what was believed to be Gilgamesh's tomb. Jörg Fassbinder gone on the BBC and said, we're 99% certain this is Gilgamesh's tomb.
I remember.
It was so important because suddenly we had an opportunity to test the historicity of the ancient Sumerian stories about sky people. Gilgamesh was a hybrid, according to those stories, so we want to see what's in that sarcophagus. The story's in the public domain on the BBC right up until the moment when they get it, and then
quiet
silence.
Yep.
And then it was a few years before Jörg Fassbinder resurfaced and said, we decided not to investigate any further and we buried the site for its own protection. Really?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's so illogical. It was important enough that within 2 weeks of the war, you're going in to sequester the item, not important enough to pursue any further. That doesn't make sense. What makes sense is that they wanted to examine what was there in private. And if the implications of what they found were too far reaching, they would never talk about it again. And if what they found was, it's just a dead human skeleton, then they could publish.
Yep.
So the fact that they didn't publish and it was silenced tells you they found something very significant and that would be damaging to maintaining the status quo, maintaining the prevailing meta-narrative. So I suspect they found exactly what they expected to find and exactly what the ancients told us they would find.
It's like in Indiana Jones. He finds the Ark of the Covenant, and they put it in a warehouse. Our best men are on it. That's what happened to Gilgamesh's tomb.
Yes.
And it's just constant. Anything to do with our government's had a persistent interest in covering up these archaeological finds. Our government, not the Catholic Church. Our government. And it will keep happening. Obviously they don't. You have in your book your one friend going off about the disclosure movement by our government on the UFO subject, how crap the 9 pages were, and like kind of what I expected from it. But that's what I'm saying. There is no disclosure. They're not disclosing anything. They're giving us a rub here because there's so much history to this. There's so much to it. It's too complicated to tell.
Yes, I agree, and I think the flimsy 9 pages of the UAP's preliminary assessment that was the paper of the Senate briefings in June 2021. It's almost like an insurance against disclosure.
That's what I'm saying.
Because
yeah.
There should have been a wad of papers this thick because it was already in the public domain that there was 70 years worth of data to come just from ATIP. But what about all the other agencies? It should have been volumes and volumes. So as soon as you see it's only 9 pages, it's some kind of a whitewash. And yet there was still information in there. It still said that every 6 weeks, US defense operations are disturbed or debilitated by UFO encounters, to use the old-fashioned word. It says that. On average, every 6 weeks over the last 17 years, that's a lot of UFO encounters. And then the paper also said there is zero evidence that those UAPs are black ops at home or the covert technology of other terrestrial powers. Zero evidence. So some very strong statements, just enough that those who really paid
an insurance
attention,
policy, in my opinion.
Yeah. At a future point, they could say, don't you remember we told you?
We tried to tell you. Yeah,
we did tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll be like, we told you. They do that a lot, I think.
I
just really think that it is what the rub. But does that mean there's something coming? People talk the return of Anunnaki or I don't know. I don't think they've left. I don't know.
Well,
See, this is one of the things is I think that gets confusing to people because it's not just grays and reptilians. We're talking about a lot of history here, 200,000 years worth or more. that the original aliens that started the story with humanity might have created us, might be long gone, never coming back. And it's a whole other alien species, Galactic Federation, that's cleaning up their mess. I don't know.
Yes, I suspect there are more demographics involved in Project Earth now than there were in the deep past. And I, like you, Jason, I'm agnostic if the Sumerian sky people are still around or if it's those who succeeded them who are around right now. I think some new demographics have arrived since the Second World War, and I think there's more need now for a Sky Council or an intergalactic federation than there was in the past. What's interesting, and I think what is continuous, though, is that the experience that was here 2,000 years ago, when the New Testament was being written, is the same as now, that you and I can expect to have contact experiences. That's written into 1 John 4, that's in the writings of Plato, that's in mystical and shamanic traditions all around the world. And those contact experiences are very often benevolent. They're from entities who are there to support human evolution and human progress, even at an individual level. And this is what our ancestral story says. So for me, that's a somewhat reassuring piece of the puzzle, that it's not just that we're here caught in the crossfire of people fighting over the planet for their own reasons. We have friends at that table. And I think it's reassuring for me to know that there are some at that table who are pro-human, pro the human experience, pro-human progress. I hope that our representatives at that table are doing careful exopolitics, doing good diplomacy. But in the meantime, disclosure isn't about you and me twiddling our thumbs, waiting for them to come clean about that, or waiting for them to have a big disclosure moment. I think it's a fool's errand to sit and wait for the president of the USA to step forward and say, my fellow Americans, I got something I want to tell you. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think you and I are going to have contact experiences and experiences of remote communication that can fill out our picture. And if we can do that and talk to one another, well, that's grassroots disclosure. And I think that is far more empowering.
That's what I've been saying. The real disclosure movement is going to be us. We,
Definitely.
the people, feeling comfortable enough to come out and talk about these experiences and share them and say, I've had enough of the narrative you've been pushing for thousands of years. Something ain't being told. There's more to this reality. There's more going on here than the mainstream media, what your religious orthodoxy is telling you. That we all have had different experiences that contradict the mainline story. I have, you have, and I know a ton of people, or at least the little people that watch, a little amount of people watch my show or listen, have. They're here for a reason. They've had experiences that go outside the narrative of what we're told is mainstream reality. And we got to start coming together and not being afraid anymore to talk about it. And don't give a crap what other people think. You yourself talk about in the book about some of the, friends you've lost and, ridicule you received from colleagues for going down this path. But you're not the only one. The thing is, there's other people separate from you did not know that are involved in scriptural research that have come up to these same conclusions as you.
Exactly. That's right. Which I discovered after I'd written Escaping from Eden. And it was somewhat of a relief to find I wasn't the only person who had come to this conclusion. I mean, some come to it from studying DNA. Some do it from studying neuroscience. But I was encouraged to find some other people in the realm of Bible translation, like Mauro Bellino, who had concluded the same as me, that the Bible is full of paleocontact. I'm glad I didn't know before, because I didn't want to write a he said, she said kind of book, because then what have I added to the conversation? I wanted to follow my data, apply my logic, and then I thought if my conclusions overlap with other people's, if it overlaps with Mauro Bellino, then that's great, because I think that's interesting for the reader. And the more people see this agreement, it's more permission giving for them to go down the rabbit hole themselves and start talking about it.
Hey, he wrote, what was it, The Naked God? Was that the name of his book or something like that? I'm trying to remember. Marino,
yes, that's right.
Marino,
that's exactly
God,
right.
Yeah, brilliant. And I mean, this is the thing. More people like you and him have to come out and say, this is just what I've found. This is, I mean, you're not trying to extrapolate anything. You're putting on the actual contextual meaning of words, the research you do. People that criticize you don't want to look. At least in the biblical realm. If they're criticizing it, that means they're not looking. They want to look away. Their criticism comes out of a blind faith in something that's, to me, a control factor. It's controlled generations of people within religion to look at religion or look at your faith as this one thing that is it's this dogma. God is this, and there's a heaven and there's a hell, and anybody else's culture or stories are all ignorance and lies and deceit and the devil or whatever. Well,
that's right.
Yeah.
And I think what's so sad about that is that kind of dogma ruins people's relationships, sometimes within their own families, and within their own culture, within their own town, and certainly at an international level, we really have learned to demonize others, demonize people who tell a different story or who think something different to ourselves, because that's part of how we justify the refusal to examine or put into context the conclusions we concluded long ago. But I think information is power, and you shouldn't be afraid to add information to what you know. And then if that makes you review some of the conclusions you concluded long ago, so be it. Because I think it's far better to be a truth seeker than someone who just maintains a doctrinal basis that was put to you and you had to sign up to.
That's one of the things I loved about Jesus, and you pointed out in the book. And I think one of the biggest clues that he was dealing with the dogma of the Hebrews at the time. He tries to point out to them, what God would give a stone to his starving people. What God would send serpents upon his people. He's trying to point out to his own apostles, I'm not talking about Yahweh, guys. When I say my Father.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. It's a pivotal moment, that saying, when Jesus says, what kind of father would give his child a scorpion instead of food, or a snake instead of food, or a stone instead of food? These are not random emblems that he's chosen. The stone and the snake narrative he has picked from a Yahweh story where the Hebrew people are starving in the desert. They've been given emergency provisions for ages. And then when they make a complaint because they want proper food, Yahweh gives them a stone from which Moses has to extract water. And then instead of giving them food, he sends snakes to bite them.
Yeah.
He's appealing to this very famous moment and says, what kind of father would do that? So in that moment, straight away that when Jesus talks about God or his Father, he's not talking about the Yahweh character in that Yahweh story. And if Jesus hadn't distanced himself from the Hebrew stories in that way, there's no way Acts 15 could have happened, where the early church leaders, Jesus' brother and the other apostles, make a ruling that faith in the Hebrew canon, as they had it at that point, was not going to be the basis of Christianity moving forward. And faith in those scriptures was not the requisite for Christianity moving forward. If Jesus had affirmed the Hebrew tradition, they couldn't have made that decision. But Jesus distanced himself time and time again. And in Echoes of Eden, I point out that moment you've just referenced as the most obvious, most far-reaching moment that proves to you that Jesus was not into the Yahweh narratives as God's stories. And once you realize that, the penny drops, and you have to go back and reread the whole Bible through very, very different lenses.
I mean, the stark contrast between the New Testament and the Old Testament of what Jesus did, and then we talk about human potential. Okay, you don't, the Old Testament, you see the loss of human potential through the Old Testament. Man lived 900 years. Man could do certain things and magic, but as it goes on, man becomes more dependent on Yahweh or God, in the Bible, saving them, and being subservient to him and worshiping him. But Jesus takes a whole different tact. He speaks in parables. He's trying to get his apostles to think for themselves. And he's showing them miraculous things and telling them, you can do this. The resurrection itself is a testimony to the ability of what human spirit could be. We're more than this material world.
He is busting their worldview wide open to show them how much more is possible for a human being. And he announces it at the beginning of his ministry. If you go to the beginning of Matthew's gospel, the writer of that gospel summarizes what the message was that Jesus toured with. And the way it's translated at the moment, it sounds like a grave warning. It sounds like this: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Right.
And it sounds like he's saying, you better clean your life up because God is about to turn up. You wouldn't want to displease him. But you go to the root meanings and you can peel back all the cultural layers and interpretations that have been laid over the top for 2,000 years. Was Jesus really saying that? What are the root meanings? The root meanings have Jesus saying this: go beyond the mind. Go beyond what you think with more than this. Go beyond the mind, because the power and principles and people of the cosmos are available to you, waiting to be embraced. Now, translated that way, which is a perfectly reasonable way of rendering the root meanings, it now sounds like an invitation to discover what's out there, who's out there, and what's possible. And then the ministry that follows seems to unpack that, because he shows higher abilities, he shows precognition, he shows remote viewing, he shows abilities in self-healing and healing others. He demonstrates some kind of interdimensional contact on the Mount of Transfiguration. His story is full of what people might call the supernatural, but what is actually demonstrating this is what's possible. This is what happens when you begin to tap the principles of the cosmos. And that language is there in the canonical Gospels. It's there in the Gnostic Gospels as well, the Gospel of Thomas, which many scholars would agree is the earliest attestation to Jesus' teaching, begins with the sentence, the kingdom of heaven is within you. So translate that. The whole realm of the cosmos operates within you, is present within you. And so if you look within, you'll find the cosmos. If you peer into the cosmos, you will discover yourself. And it couldn't be a more profound invitation to explore what's there and explore what's possible. And as you say, Jason, he does these amazing things and then turns to his followers and says, these and even greater things will you do? Will you do?
One of the best lines in your book is page 148. Empowered individuals and autocratic governments do not make easy bedfellows. And that's what Jesus was. He was trying to empower people to this potential, and that narrative had to be changed by the church. I mean, that's why the Cathars had to be erased. That's why the church has done everything to erase that kind of idea of empowerment and spiritual. The earliest Christian church was along these lines of ascension and reaching that human potential. And
Indeed.
It was completely changed.
And you can look at state examples of that. You can look at Gandhi, look at Socrates, Giordano Bruno.
It never works out well.
Another
Giordano Bruno.
Yeah. Empowered individuals don't fare well. And especially in moments when the powers are insecure and really wanting to double down on controlling the narrative. And so that was happening with Giordano Bruno when the church had really lost control of the narrative because of all the discoveries of the previous 100 years. It was an incredible flowering of human learning, intelligence, consciousness, and Giordano Bruno was giving everything he was learning to the general public. And that's
the known world to tell
travel
people.
The world. And that's why it went wrong for him, because the powers believe it's empowering information for the powers and disempowering information for the public. John Dee just about survived because he gave his information to Queen Elizabeth I and the Holy Roman Emperor and not to the public. Giordano Bruno gave his information to the public and was executed.
Yep.
Case in point.
Yeah. John Dee is a whole. We talked about that last time on the show. Is how interested I am in John Dee and the story at 007, the original spy and remote viewing. We can get into that in our last half hour. But Giordano Bruno is a hero, in my opinion. You know, they imprisoned him for 7 years before they finally execute him because he would never confess. He would never, recant on what he said. He stood by it to the moment they put a nail through his damn tongue. That's how.
And isn't it
we were.
interesting? Oh, it's a very sad story. So brutal how he was killed by the church, by church authorities, mark you. But there was so much in what he wrote about, but how interesting that he talked about populated universe and human potential. And those things were absolutely interwoven in his thinking. And that's what he offered the public. And even though all his works were put onto the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, that information has survived and resurfaced for us to study today and understand the implications.
I mean, this kind of information. I mean, look, there was let's see. You have Russia had a whole cosmonist kind of philosophy going on right before the Bolshevik Revolution, and then they wiped that out. Germany had a cult, all this kind of occult, society that actually the Nazi Party built off of and then silenced. Even though they were secretly using it. You look at the royal family. I love how they destroy it, but they keep parts of it. They take the parts they want for themselves and hide from the public to use, like John Dee with Queen Elizabeth. Like she is a prominent Protestant. Was it? She was Protestant.
Protestant Queen. Yeah. That's right.
And she obviously had faith.
Reformer.
Yeah, but she
Absolutely.
Believed in John Dee and the astrology.
She did. So, I mean, she was a Christian in power, so she had access to this other information that told her that something like remote viewing was possible, and she hired John Dee to get that going for Her Majesty's Secret Service. But it was certainly not information for the general public. And if Joe Blow had been doing remote viewing for Jack Sprat in the town square, he would have been arrested and burned as a witch. And that nearly happened to John Dee because he was helping Elizabeth when she was a princess, before she inherited the throne, and he was nearly executed for doing that for her at that time. So it was a really dangerous period, but it's just an example of a moment where you've got one clear track of information for the public and a totally different one for the powers.
I mean, it's still happening. You bring up the whole remote viewing program in the United States. We used that intelligence for years. It was obviously producing something. We put millions of dollars in it through how many presidents? I think 4.
Well, I think it was 6.
5?
I think it was for
6.
Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton. They all had to approve the ongoing funding of those programs that were curated by Stanford Research Institute and oversighted by the CIA. The only reason they got the funding year after year was because it was yielding information. It was yielding strategic information that was of intelligence value. If it wasn't, they would have shut it down. Officially, it got shut down in, was it 1995? Because a new chief of staff came in who was a fundamentalist Christian and didn't want to have anything to do with something he thought was demonic because he didn't have enough boxes, to tick for what was going on. What I think actually happened is that it was subcontracted. There's no way you would get rid of a technology like that if it was yielding useful strategic information. You would just subcontract it to another group and it becomes a black op.
I think they just used that. I think it was purposely done to put somebody in position that ignorant would say something as stupid as they did on the Senate floor, which is, you're conducting devil's work, which was said in open forum. The only reason that was done, they put that person in power to be the idiot to shut it down publicly. And so it could go privatized into the private sector and forgotten about because we needed to still use this technology, but too many people are starting to ask questions. Too many congressmen and senators are getting aware of it. And we need this to go quiet like the UFO program. So let's get this idiot up there to call it the devil's work. In 1995, after it produced substantial results, Jimmy Carter, you mentioned, he's an evangelical Christian, knew it worked. He's commented on it.
That's right. They used remote viewing to find a downed Russian jet in Zaire. And it was actually a US Air Force officer who did the remote viewing that produced the longitude and latitude coordinates to locate it, because all their other technology had failed. And I love the fact that President Carter spoke about that openly. He is an evangelical Christian, and I hope that gives people permission to realize there's something real here.
Encounter openly, you know.
Indeed. So if he can say that, it ought to give people permission to say, well, maybe this is something accessible to us regular folk as well. If there are people doing this for the CIA, then maybe remote viewing is something that can be part of a more general human experience.
Imagine the national security risk that they realized when they could train anybody to look into the secretest places in the world and give them information that if any human could do it, well, damn straight, we need to make this look like devil's work, or this doesn't do anything. People don't look the other way, because they sure as hell don't want people. Yeah, they don't want people remote viewing Area 51 or anything else secret that they have going on. Yeah, they would definitely want to disparage it, censor it, kill it, get rid of it. Nobody needs to know that that's real. That would be, to me, top classified along with UFOs and aliens.
I think that's right. I mean, it's just common sense that governments want to spy on others. They don't want to be spied on. And remote viewing is part of that pattern.
Yeah, because once we did it because the Soviets were. And
That's
you
right.
mentioned, the Soviets were, like I said, they got rid of the whole cosmologist belief in the universe and anything religious-wise at that time in the Soviet Union. But they sure as heck took that seriously, remote viewing.
I think that's really what got the attention of U.S. intelligence, because the Soviet Union had this very dry secular worldview. They weren't into spirituality, mysticism, woo-woo. The only reason they would be investing their scarce dollars or rubles into this technology was if it was useful. Exactly. And if it was useful to them, then there's no way the US couldn't have its own program using the same technology.
All right, we got to go to commercial break. We got one last half hour, people. We'll open up the phone lines when we come back. If you want to call in, join the conversation. Again, Paul shares in his book some of his experiences with possible ET contact. If you had an experience, I'd love to hear about it tonight. But we're going to go to our commercial break, and then when we come back, we'll continue this conversation about paleocontact. And like I said, I think the ETs are still here. It's paleocontact and contact happening now when we come back from the short commercial break.
Intercepted transmission of unknown origin.
Transmission? Out here?
SOS.
Human.
Unknown.
Alien. Certificate X. Exclusive engagement at the Odeon Leicester Square. Now.
Any systematized transmission indicating a possible intelligent origin must be investigated.
I will hear it.
In space, no one can hear you scream.
If you are interested in discovering the truth about the paranormal and want to hear from leading researchers in the field, join Justin Brown on his 3 weekly shows named My Paranormal Soapbox, Necromancer Live Show, and the Supernatural Symposium, live on Facebook, YouTube, and InterfaceDeath.net.
This is an Apex Studio presentation.
Hi, I'm Barry, owner-operator of Barry's Barometer Barn. Lately, I bet you've been lying awake at night asking yourself, how many barometers do I really need? Well, at Barry's Barometer Barn, we think you need more than one. Otherwise, we're gonna go out of business. Remember, at Barry's Barometer Barn, we don't know the meaning of high-pressure sales. Come on, folks, buy another barometer. I'm trying to put my kids through college, I've got a family to support, and a secret mistress who isn't cheap.
Visit Barry's Barometer Barn, 000 Storm Drive. Come on, folks, buy a barometer. I'm Barry's older brother, Larry, and every time one of you people walk past the store without coming in, Barry beats me.
This has been a presentation from Tim Morgan's APAC Studio. For more almost professional amateur comic studio content, visit the APAC YouTube channel. Search APAC 2002. That's APAC 2002 on YouTube.
When Alex Gardner is asleep, he has an extraordinary gift. The government wants it, the scientists want it, but to keep it may cost him his life. It might be better if Alex didn't sleep at all, but he cannot resist entering the dreamscape. Can you? See Dreamscape in the West End and all over London now. Certificate 15. It takes an extraordinary adventurer to enter the dreamscape.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from Talkstream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Heat 'em up.
Do,
re.
You got.
I'm not hearing anything.
Sorry, my internet just crashed. Hopefully we're back. At the same time, I see somebody putting hot girls video chat. I see this one, Jamie and Ron. What is this? Put user in timeout, block user. Whoever that is, they're blocked. You there, Paul? Sorry about that. My internet crashed. Oh, you're muted. Hold on. Nope, unmute. Hold on. All right, now talk. Nope, you still don't have audio. It might reset your settings. There you go. I hear you now.
All right. Okay, we're back.
Yeah, the internet crashed right as I was coming back. I'm like, at first I noticed, I'm like, wait a second, I have no internet on my phone. And then you froze. I'm like, oh no, it's all crashing. Oh, but we're here.
We've returned from the void.
That kind of threw me off. I had a whole other part of the last segment here what I want to talk about, and my brain's totally gone COVID brain on me, and that did not help.
No worries. How about higher cognitive powers?
Higher cognitive powers, yes. Let's get into that, because I think this is the thesis of your book, is this being suppressed through all these different cultures and human potential. So yes, please.
So we were just talking about, governments don't want empowered individuals running around. What governments want is a population that's easily managed. And so that relates to access to information, which we were just talking about, but it also relates to how intelligent and how conscious we are. And I think just as our ancestors in the deep past talked about rulers who didn't want human beings who were too clever. So you've got Enlil in the Sumerian story. You've got the God character, the Yahweh character in Genesis 3, who didn't want the humans too clever. And then you've got those who engineer in the Popol Vuh, didn't want them too clever. You've got Abassi and Atai in the epic narrative from out of Nigeria, didn't want them too clever. Zeus didn't want them too clever. It goes all around the world, this idea. And so the humans have to be dumbed down to a point where they can be managed. And the Popol Vuh, I find very interesting because of the way it talks about what that dumbing down meant. And it talked about the vision of human beings being diminished by the use of a mist. Now, what that meant was a vapor would be sprayed over human populations that would damage our brain health to the point where we lose our higher cognitive, the ability to tap our higher cognitive
Sounds like what people claim are going with chemtrails.
Well, you wonder.
It sounds really similar.
Were we told these stories as a warning as to what to look out for?
Right.
And at the very least, what it tells us is look out for things in the environment that will damage your physical health or your neurological health. Because when you're maximally healthy, your vision won't be limited in the ways that happen. Well, what does that mean? How is our vision limited exactly? Well, it's limited by surfaces. You can't see into things, you can't see behind things. It's limited by distance. You can't see over the horizon. You can't see into space. You can't see to another country. It's limited by time. You can see the present. You can't see the future. You can't see the past. It's limited by frequency. You can only see this range of colors, whereas this other animal can see this, this other animal can see this. What happens if you take all those limits off? All of a sudden, you're talking about future viewing, remote viewing, X-ray vision, things that have an application to how we live in the world and to self-healing. And cultures all around the world have their different language and stories for talking about that. And they also have mystical and shamanic protocols for accessing those abilities, things like future viewing, remote viewing. And the more you listen to the more world mythologies and ancestral narratives, you realize this was the practice of our ancestors. That this is part of what's been curated by initiation tradition. We talked earlier about the state wanting to shut down initiation traditions because they don't want people who can remote view a paper on a minister's desk. They don't want people who are more conscious, more intelligent. I mean, in the Popol Vuh, those who engineer were saying basically, we can't manage a population, we can't manipulate them if they always know what we're thinking. And that's why they had to dial them down. Same today as it ever was. And in Echoes of Eden, I go to ancient story about those higher powers, but then to contemporary experience as well, because I don't think there'd be a person listening who hasn't had a glimpse of remote viewing at some point, or a glimpse of precognition, or a glimpse of telepathic connection. When these moments happen, we all think, oh, I wonder how that worked. I wonder if I could do that more. I wonder if that could be nurtured. And our ancestors say, yes, yes, and yes.
I mean, I've had so many precognitive experiences, I have no doubt of the ability, you know. And it makes you wonder, I mean, right now, human civilization, we do everything artificially to make up for our lack of potential, or lack of realizing our potential. We have spy satellites to do the remote viewing for us. We can fly by using planes. You know, all the things that we might have had potential of doing in the past, we've artificially done. And now, I mean, love Elon Musk buying Twitter, but he also wants to put chips in people's brains. You know what I'm saying? And these are the things that worry me. That we're going to go down. We're not going to go the right way in human evolution. We're going to go more like the Borg. Borg in Star Trek, you know?
Yes, anyone who's watched Star Trek knows a chip in the brain is not a good idea. But yes, I think that's absolutely right, what you just said.
I want to see humans evolve to that potential that Jesus Christ talked about, that Buddha talked about.
Indeed.
You know,
and I think we have. I think we've done exactly what you said, Jason. We have created technology to do things that we've instinctively felt we should be able to do.
Right, exactly.
We should be able to do remote communication, so we invent the telephone. We should be able to fly, so we create that technology, so on and so forth. And I think that our ancestors had other ways of doing those things. And it's not that I'm anti-technology at all. I'm very happy we can do exactly what we're doing right now. I'm very happy.
I'm on Star Trek. I'm going to explore space. So come on, let's go.
Absolutely.
You know?
I'm grateful for the online space that means we can have conversations like this that are global, and more people get access to the information.
Yeah, we're not going to try to remote, you know, like I'm not going to telepathically stream Paranormal Soup out to everybody. It's already enough to get listeners.
Indeed. But I think it's not just a matter of saying, well, we've got the phone, so we don't need to do remote communication. We've got drones, we don't need to do remote viewing. This is about how healthy are you, according to the Popol Vuh way of seeing it. Are you as healthy and human as you can be? Are you having as good a human experience as you can have? And it's not just about switching superpowers on, which would be fun. It's what would it look like if we could live more conscious and more intelligently on planet Earth? I think you've got a case study in the story of the Cathars, where the experience of society lifted as people tapped information from their higher selves. I think that story gives us a glimpse of what might be possible for us in the here and now. And again, if we are sitting waiting for governments to do this for us, to elevate human society so we're all having a better human experience, I'm afraid that is not in any of the election leaflets I've read from any of the parties standing in Australia right now.
Oh, well, here in America, they keep making all these promises and they want to do all these things to revolutionize and let's go green. And it's just a scam.
I think it has to be grassroots.
Yep.
We have to find our way forward. We have to discover how to switch ourselves on at a higher level and operate as more conscious, more intelligent human beings.
Well, what I'm afraid is, you know, the dumbing down is what's happening. That's what they are trying to. I keep preaching to people, go watch the movie Idiocracy, because you know, I'm just saying that movie is the scary future I fear. Is such a dumbed down population, you know, to that extent that we could reach that. I honestly feel that there's some real possibility to the movie Idiocracy.
Similar with Don't Look Up, which is
Don't Look Up. There you go.
A celebration of dumb society. Or if you prefer not to watch those, go and watch Gladiator, which is the story of a Roman emperor who works out if you entertain people enough and distract people enough, then the powers can do whatever they want. And that's kind of where we are right now. But I do think it's not the whole story, and especially because of the online space, there are plenty of people around the world who are saying, no, I want to know what's going on, and I want to know what's possible, and I want to know how we can feel our way forwards to a better human experience. And I find people contacting me every week who are in every age bracket, who are in that place of waking up and saying, I just don't believe what I believed 10 years ago. I don't slavishly believe everything that I'm told on the news. I am on my own journey of exploration and discovery, and I'm finding it really exciting. And when people in their 80s tell me that, I haven't seen or heard that before. I think that is something fresh and new and exciting.
I'm excited by it, and I think it's so much happening that people are becoming this way. They're to question the narrative that, like I said, our government's making a disinformation organization within our government that they're going to decide what's disinformation and it's not. That tells you how scared they are of it. That tells you how scared they are of people holding their own opinions or seeking out their own truth and looking into things on their own and not trusting their narrative or the media's narrative anymore. People have lost faith in their government, and people have lost faith in the mainstream media narrative, and they know it, and now they're scared. And now that's when you start making government agencies to deal with it, and that's scary to me. You know, how far does that go? And, you know, when do they decide that this is disinformation, you know? They don't agree with the paranormal. We had a senator not long ago, 1995, calling remote viewing the devil's work. Patograms shift. You might like the disinformation unit right now because you think they need to get rid of some kind of form of disinformation on a political side you don't agree with. But what happens when the political swing shifts to another side? It goes totally far conservative again. And then what narratives are they going to call disinformation? You know, truth is truth, and freedom of speech is freedom of speech, you know, and people need to start sticking up for it.
I think so. I think one of the struggles a lot of people have is that they're under a lot of pressure financially. And so they are far busier than a healthy human being would be given the choice. And sometimes I think when we're overstretched and overstressed, we can feel very overwhelmed by the need to look beyond the simple, lazy narrative that you'll pick up on the TV news. And people feel they don't have the emotional energy to go there and make their journeys of exploration. And that's why I love platforms like yours, Jason, because I think we actually encourage each other. I think we give each other energy for exploration and discovery. And I think it's very, very important. It's hard to do it on your own, and it's hard to do it when you're overworked. But I think it's important that we do it. And for some people, the last couple of years has been very, very difficult financially. And for other people, they've had a little bit more time at home sitting in front of their laptop with YouTube open. And they have had the opportunity to go down a few rabbit holes. And I think that has changed things. I've met so many people who've told me in the last 2 years, I started following my curiosity and I started watching things on YouTube. And I realized I had a lot of questions that hadn't been answered. And I think that's a positive thing that's happened through a very difficult time that we need to encourage in every way we can think.
Right, exactly. Is it just a question? Just a question. It's bugged me for so long, for so many years, how many people haven't asked these questions, you know, haven't gotten into the fact of the contradictions between the Old Testament and the New Testament, or the suppression of other cultures and their traditions, and how similarly, if you look at what was trying to be suppressed, how many things these cultures all tell the same story. You know,
Yes.
you know, our origins of humanity here. You know, people say they go to church every day and they believe in their God and their faith, but then they don't want to actually look at what is our origin. You know, I mean, you have the Bible, but don't you want to look at what backed that up? What's the origin story here? You know, there's a lot of information out there people just don't want to look at or care. They just like the news. They just want to take the main headline and go with that. And some people go passionately with it. You know, they self-identify with a narrative they see or want to do it without looking into any truth of it.
Yes, that's right. Or, of course, official narratives around world events.
Mm-hmm.
You know, reasons for a war, what actually happened in that particular attack, so on and so forth. And there are often moments where you have a choice to say, okay, well, that's been answered. Or you have a choice to say, that does not wholly explain what happened. And again, it takes a certain amount of emotional energy to leave it unresolved and to say, I'd like to know more about that. And I think that overstressing, underpaying, keeping people anxious and ill is another way in which the powers avoid
You're too busy
asking. Yeah, too busy to ask questions.
Yeah.
And so I think
just trying to feed a family, you know.
It's important not to be too judgy of people who don't question, because they just might not be able to right now. Given the opportunity, given the leisure, given the time, and a lot more people do. And that's what we've seen in the last couple of years.
No, I learned a long time ago, because when I was in my 20s, that was my question. Why aren't people into this? Why are people asking the questions? Then I grew up and had kids and financial problems, and I realized this is why. Okay, I got it now. Get off your high horse. Yeah, and that's the thing. We're caught up in the rat race of life and survival every day, paying the bills, dealing with stupid stressors that we do lose focus on it. And then we get a lot of other distractions, TikTok and social media and all this other nonsensical crap. I'm just disappointed in humanity that we haven't woke up. And the thing is it seems like it's been an intelligent force to find one way or another to keep us distracted from our human potential.
Exactly. And it's a long, long story. It's not just the last couple of years.
No, it's always been
an iteration of it in every generation. And so I hope when people read Echoes of Eden, that'll give them a bit of courage as well to say, well, I don't want to be part of that strand of the story. Thank you very much. I'm going to put myself here and be a seeker of truth, be empowered by information, have a better human experience in my own life and the life of my family.
And that's one of the reasons I love about the book is you do take us on the journey of different cultures and their I want to call it their initiation ceremony.
Yes.
And about how these young men, I want to say men because it was men in the example, but it could be women too, but it was young men putting in situations that would open their senses up, take them away from all the technology, all our comforts of living, and put them out in the middle of the wilderness and let them fend for their own, and then their senses come alive and they connect to something more. And I feel that's what we're missing. When I read that part in your book about at least Troy, I think it was the Navajo.
That's right.
And his experience is like that is what we are missing. I'm just as guilty on my phone and all this technology and comforts of society. We're missing this primitive connection to this other sensory, this other part of our. It would have been our survival back in the ancient days. The reconnect with that for humanity. What do you think it will take to get people to start doing that? To get away from the technology so much. Not that it's all that bad, but to reconnect to that part of themselves, that human potential.
Well, I think a lot of people are discovering that in different ways. I think health is a big driver, that people rediscover the importance of getting away from technology, getting into nature when their health is suffering. And if ever you need to recalibrate physically or emotionally or mentally, very often you just know instinctively you need to get out into nature, do some more deep breathing, get some more sunlight on your skin, and recalibrate. People feel it in their bones. They have to do something like that. And our instinct of the tradition of walkabout, I think, really comes into play. So that when you read the story of Troy in Echoes of Eden, it's like there's a moment of recognition. That's what I needed. That's what I missed out on. Because initiation culture has been removed from mainstream Western culture. So when we see someone who's had it done and could see the advantage of it, see what's happened to them as a consequence, or we read of the process, I think there is this sense of yearning. That's what I need. And so what we can do, first of all, look after our health in the ways I mentioned, look after our environment in the way those stories suggest, avoid toxins, make sure your water's clean, your food is clean, your environment is clean. Then you can also go and sit at the feet of elders and guardians of indigenous traditions. And that might be reading a book, or it might be finding an actual person that you can spend time with, or go on a particular kind of retreat. It might be looking into your own ancestry and saying, oh, I've actually got Nordic heritage. What were the Norse stories? I've actually got Celtic heritage. What were the Celtic stories? I've got Southern African heritage. What were the Southern African stories? I'm a mix of all those things, actually. I've got West African, I've got Celtic, I've got Nordic, I've got French, and there are indigenous narratives in all those places that I just have this particular resonance with. And I think it's a fun way of tapping into who we are, what our roots are, and also just to begin to tune into the information that flows to you, you might say intuitively. because now we are speaking about remote communication. We're talking about contact modalities. It's the experience of every generation that we're not trying to rediscover the human condition on our own. We're preceded by generations, and we're going to be followed by generations. We're part of a much bigger story. And I love how Troy talks about that in Echoes of Eden, that seeing yourself in part of that longer story even lifts your decision-making out of the mundane. If for a moment you can step outside of the urgent push and pull of, I need this much money, I've got this many hours this week, and ask, what am I going to do to benefit my family 7 generations hence? Well, what decisions might you make then? Would you be living somewhere differently if you asked that? Would you be looking after your health differently if you asked that? And I think you would. But there's so much wisdom that has survived. And I do think there are very practical ways, like reading a book, even going on YouTube, going on a retreat, finding out your own heritage, that can help you tap into ancient indigenous story. And it is so powerful. It is resonant enough to have survived centuries of suppression. When you start exposing yourself to that, it will have an effect on you. And it is a deep, profound, empowering effect. So in Echoes of Eden, I encourage people to go there.
I mean, I'm Cherokee Irish, and I've always been fascinated with both those traditions.
Good blend.
You know. A German too, a lot of German, Irish, and Cherokee. But you know, the Cherokees had they believe they were star people. A lot of that, you get into this in the book too, and I know we're almost out of time, but you know, I've always been fascinated with the Native American traditions and their concept of the beginnings of their humanity and all that. It seems like no matter what, when you look at a lot of this history, there are definitely has to be some positive aliens out there trying to help us. They've helped us at times when we were famined, when they gave us ways to make, you know, the farm and agriculture, gave us certain technologies to keep us alive, obviously. You know, not just to be slaves. This is after they left or after they used us as slaves. I always say there's got to be multiple different alien factors involved here, because there seems like aliens that don't want anything to do with humans, aliens that want to rule humans, and aliens that want to help humans evolve. There's a lot of that throughout the history, and it's just trying like which aliens are we talking about? It's what it seems like. It's trying to figure out
who are our helpers.
Who are our helpers and who are not.
That's right. And I love the fact that if you listen to Cherokee story or Iroquois story or Hopi story or Aboriginal Australian story, their stories of origins are stories of first contact, and the first contact is with neighbors who are benevolent, who are helping us get our footing on planet Earth. And I believe we still have access to those same helpers. I think that's the case today. I think those who do channeling and get benevolent, positive messages, that's the kind of contact we're talking about, the same that the Cherokee talked about in the deep past.
Looking at alien contactees and abductees, they all say, so many of them say the aliens warned them that we're not taking care of the planet. We're destroying the planet. How many have to keep telling us the aliens have told them that we're destroying the planet? You know.
Yes, that's right. And wouldn't it be a shame if we dismissed that report for political reasons that belong in the 21st century, when actually our neighbors have been telling us about this living in balance on the planet for thousands of years. So please don't see it as a political issue or a Republican versus Democrat issue. It isn't. Contact going back thousands of years has been tutelage to us in how to live sustainably, intelligently on planet Earth.
Yeah, sadly, it gets turned into a political issue, though. That's what and that's sad. Even back in the '60s, our FBI was looking into the Space Brothers meetings because they were talking about things that they felt were communist. It threatened the hierarchy then. Whenever the aliens are talking about just peace, love, and just live harmony with the planet, the government's like, no, shut that down. Shut that down. We don't want to talk about that. So it's been a threat and still be a threat to the powers that be, just wanting us to get along, everybody get along and live peacefully with the earth and treat it, with respect. No, we can't have that. We gotta get our money. That's what it always is about, is money, power, control. And the only thing that's going to change it is us.
Yes, that's right. I think, I only have to look at my grandparents to be able to go back to a generation where a lot of their living was not money-based. They grew a lot of their own food, for instance. They used money for fewer things. And I think those are really good lessons to learn. And it's that close to me generationally, but it is so persistent through the ages. If you listen to the story that the Mohawk people tell, they tell about a moment where there was a shift in their environment. Something had happened that had put them into a different environment where the climate was not familiar to them and the plants were not familiar. And their survival hung in the balance. And their story is they only survived that because of contact experiences. So I think we need to tap into that kind of information now as much as ever at a family level, and I think at a corporate level as well. How are we going to get through the shifts we're seeing right now, which are profound? How are we going to live sustainably on our planet? It's a profound question, but we're not on our own in addressing it.
No, not at all. Well, Paul, it's been an honor to have you on the show. I truly enjoy Echoes of Eden. I left a review, but I forgot to put my name on it. It'll be under my wife's name, Susan.
Oh,
you'll see that in my
awesome.
last name on Amazon. But I was like, dang it, I forgot to put my name under it because it's her Amazon account and on my own. But I truly, again, love the book. I love all your books, and I can't recommend them more to people. And definitely check out Fifth Kind TV on YouTube. The amazing content you always are putting up there as well.
Thank you. And the Paul Wallis channel as well, which gets a bit more into the spirituality aspect as well.
Yes, that's another great, so many resources, Paul. Can't wait to have you back on again. That is the end of the show.
Jason.
I got to get my butt to bed because, man, whew. Yeah, I can feel it. Oh, that's the wrong. See, I can't even press the right buttons. There we go. That's outro music. All right, guys, that's it for the show. Thank you again, Paul. Thank you for putting up with my sick butt tonight.
Oh, thank you.
And we will be back next Sunday with Mother's Day, actually. It'll be psychic medium Karen Noe and Marie Antoinette Kelly, who's a graphic artist that's worked with her. We'll be talking with them next Sunday, same bad time, same bad channel, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Central, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you to everybody who watched the show. Thank you to everybody who shares it out. Thank you to all my Patreons. $2 a month does help support the show. Thank you to all you who do support the show. All right, guys, have a great week. See you next Sunday.